Chapter 33:13. I can't take it. Mushi pushed the card back and shook her head frantically. Shusha, I can't take it from you. Why are you being so polite with me? Just treat it as a loan. My dad. Mushi gritted her teeth and hesitated for a while. In the end, she did not have the courage to tell her everything. Instead, she said with difficulty, my dad is fine. Then, I've noticed that you don't look well these past 2 days. Shusha smiled. If you're unhappy about something, feel free to tell me. Mushi was flustered. She hurriedly stood up and said, I'll go to the washroom. Oh, Shusha watched in a daze as she suddenly stood up and hurried into the washroom. She was a little confused. Mushi dashed into the washroom and locked the door from the inside. She held onto the counter for support as tears streamed down her face. She bit her lower lip hard and covered her mouth uneasily. Looking at the mirror, her eyes were redder than ever. Yo-Yo walked over and saw Shusha sitting on the sofa. She was dressed neatly and had light makeup on. He asked curiously, Mommy, are you going out today? Didn't I tell you before that there's a charity banquet tonight? The little lad tilted his head curiously and was a little puzzled. Are you going alone? Shusha said, Mushi will accompany me. Yo-Yo frowned but did not say anything. There was actually no need to attend a charity banquet. Most charity banquets appeared to be for charity on the surface, but they were not serious banquets behind the scenes. Many powerful entrepreneurs would attend charity banquets. Hence, many female celebrities would often use charity banquets as an excuse to travel among the big shots of the business world in search of potential investors. If they could hook up with a potential investor, it meant that they would have a meteoric rise in their career. Many entertainment companies would also try their best to push their artists into such banquets in order to broaden their network. These entrepreneurs, under the guise of charity, could establish a positive image in front of the public by doing charity on the surface. Behind the scenes, they could use this banquet to look for potential partners. It was the best of both worlds. Still, since Mushi was with him, he believed that nothing would go wrong. Yo-Yo asked, when is Mommy coming back? I'll be back as soon as the party is over. Just as she finished speaking, Mushi walked out of the washroom. She smiled at Shusha and said, Shusha, the car is waiting for us. Let's go. Shusha nodded and said to her, wait, I'll go get the necklace. Mushi's face froze for a moment before she nodded unnaturally. Shusha took out the jewelry box, only to see her assistant standing at the door, biting her nails nervously. She furrowed her brows. Mushi, what's wrong? I'm afraid I won't make it in time. Didn't you say 8 o'clock in the evening? Go early, or you'll be late. As she spoke, she held Shusha's hand and said, let's go. Shusha did not think much of it. She nodded and followed her assistant to the entrance of the villa. She looked around but did not see the waiting car. Curious, she asked, where's the car? It's parked on Zonghung Road. So far. Zonghung Road was a kilometer away from here. Why was it parked so far away? Chapter 33:14. She did not know that because Shangti Walk was surrounded by surveillance cameras, the car was parked in a secluded area to avoid being noticed. Mushi said, security is tight here. No parking is allowed at the entrance. As she spoke, she added, Shusha, let's go. Don't be late. Shusha gradually had doubts in her heart, but when she saw Mushi's face, she trusted her completely and did not doubt her. Along the way, Mushi was a little quiet. Shusha was even more puzzled when she saw that, for some reason, her forehead was covered in cold sweat and her hands were trembling. Mushi. Chem. Do you know? You're acting weird today. Mushi laughed dryly. Weird? What's weird about it? I see that you're always absent-minded. Your hands are trembling, as if you're guilty of something. Shusha did not mince her words. Mushi's heart skipped a beat. Seeing this, Shusha was even more convinced of her judgment. Mushi, you're hiding something from me. This sentence made the already guilty Mushi's heart beat even faster. She turned her face away, feeling even more embarrassed. Shusha, what nonsense are you talking about? What can I hide from you? If I knew, I wouldn't be so curious. Yoon Shusha suddenly asked, Mushi, could it be that you've encountered something that you're too embarrassed to talk about? No, I thought that I should be the person you trust the most. Pausing for a moment, she continued slowly, but you rarely mention anything to me when you're in a difficult situation. Could it be that I'm not trustworthy? How is that possible? Mushi retorted. Shusha, don't let your imagination run wild. Mushi, I really want to help you. Yoon Shusha smiled. Do you know? I trust you a lot, so I want to be the person you trust, too. Chem. Mushi looked at her in a daze. Looking at Yoon Shusha's gentle eyes, her heart wavered for a moment. She clenched her fists tightly and trembled all over. Not far away, a black car slowly drove over. Mushi turned her head to take a look at the car's license plate. Knowing that someone was here, her eyes darkened. Yoon Shusha turned around and glanced at the car. She asked curiously, is that the car? Mushi remained silent. When the car stopped steadily beside Yoon Shusha, the car door opened and two men in black suits stepped out. Yoon Shusha couldn't help but take a few steps back in shock. She was shocked, not because the car appeared too suddenly, but because there was a very cold, murderous aura on the two men. He gave off a feeling that he had come with ill intentions. The two men walked up to Yoon Shusha and said coldly, "Get in the car." Her cold tone made her feel conflicted. She took a few steps back and looked at her assistant, only to see the latter turn around all of a sudden and open her mouth, seemingly mouthing something to her. Run, run. She was so nervous that she was sweating profusely. Yoon Shusha frowned but didn't understand. Mushi, what did you say? Mushi gritted her teeth in confusion. Before she could walk toward her, the two men behind her had already taken a few steps toward her. Yoon Shusha looked at them warily. What are you doing? Get in the car. How do I know who you are and where you're taking me? Yoon Shusha looked at her assistant. Mushi, who are they? Chapter 33:15. Run. Mushi screamed hysterically all of a sudden. She rushed over, grabbed Yoon Shusha's hand, and ran in the opposite direction. Yoon Shusha was stunned and did not understand what had happened. However, when she saw Mushi's nervous expression, she also became nervous and subconsciously ran with all her might. However, they were women, after all. Mushi was wearing sports shoes and could run fast, but Yoon Shusha was wearing wedge heels and could not run fast at all. Yoon Shusha heard the footsteps behind her and nervously kicked her high heels further away and ran barefoot. Her feet were scraped by the cement floor and were bleeding. However, in less than 10 seconds, they were quickly caught up by two men in black. One in front and one behind, they surrounded them. Mushi became nervous and immediately reached out to block Yoon Shusha. She looked at them in shock. What are you guys trying to do? Hand her over. No. Mushi shrieked. You can't take her away. Don't forget your deal with the boss. One of the men threatened coldly. Take her away and we'll let your parents go. This is the agreement in the deal. Mushi bit her lip hard and stood firmly in front of Yoon Shusha. Her eyes were red. You can't hurt her. You're not allowed to say anything. This is an order. One of the men kicked her away and she fell to the ground. Yoon Shusha was about to help her up when the other man stepped forward and pulled her in front of him. He took out a pair of handcuffs and tied her hands behind her back, not allowing her to struggle. Mushi shrieked when she saw this. No. Yoon Shusha was even more baffled. She did not know what kind of drama was going on. Why would two men appear out of nowhere with such menacing looks? She panted and questioned, Who are you guys? Yoon Shusha, our boss wants to see you. Tie me up and bring me to see him. Compared to Mushi's panic, Yoon Shusha was much calmer. She sneered and said, Is this your boss's sincerity? This is the boss's order. What's your motive? Yoon Shusha looked at Mushi and asked anxiously, Mushi, what's going on? Mushi was scared out of her wits. Trembling, she broke down and cried, Shusha, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. She kept apologizing desperately, but Yoon Shusha was even more confused. She did not know what she was apologizing for. Why are you apologizing? Shusha, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm really at my wit's end, that's why I'm feeling dizzy. What exactly are you talking about? Before Yoon Shusha could understand the situation, the man behind her grabbed her hair and pulled her toward the car. "Let go," she roared. "Don't touch me." "Shusha." She pounced forward and knelt in front of the two men. She kept kowtowing and begging, "Don't hurt her. I'm begging you. I'm begging you. She's innocent." The man kicked her away. She clutched her chest and fell to the side. When she saw Yoon Shusha being stuffed into the car, she endured the pain and pounced on the car door. "I'll go with you, okay? Let her go. Please let her go." Chapter 33:16. However, the man ignored her and slammed the car door shut. Her hand was pinched hard by the door. She let out a shrill shriek. The man walked in front of her and kicked her in the chest. The next moment, her body was like a piece of broken paper as she flew out and hit the stone wall at the side. The back of her head hit the stone wall hard. An earth-shattering darkness enveloped her. Her body went limp and she slid down the wall to the ground. Her eyelids drooped loosely. The car door closed. Yoon Shusha nervously pressed herself against the window. She looked at Shi, who was lying on the ground, and shouted something. However, the car's soundproofing was excellent, so her voice could not be heard. Shi tried to lift her heavy eyelids, but she could only watch as the black car sped away and disappeared from her sight. Shusha, Yo-Yo sat in the study, feeling uneasy. Ever since Yoon Shusha left, he felt uneasy for some reason, as if something big was about to happen. This was probably the magical telepathy between mother and son. On the other hand, he felt that Shi was too strange today. She looked absent-minded, evasive, and inexplicably guilty. He inadvertently caught her looking at Yoon Shusha with remorse, pity, and guilt in her eyes. This made him feel that something was amiss. He sent Lee Hanlin to investigate the charity banquet, but there was still no reply. Impatient of waiting, he called again to urge him. Lee Hanlin quickly found some clues. "I've checked all the channels, but there's no news of a charity banquet being held in the capital tonight." Hearing this, Yu stood up abruptly with a look of astonishment. "What? Yo-Yo, the charity banquet you mentioned doesn't exist. What's wrong? What's your motive for asking about this?" "My mommy said." Yo-Yo suddenly felt his throat go dry. "My mommy said that we're going to attend a charity banquet tonight." "Impossible." Lee Hanlin said, "There's no charity banquet. How is that possible?" "Shit." Yo-Yo suddenly realized something. Just as she was about to hang up the call, she suddenly thought of something and ordered, "Shi. Hanlin, check this person's IP address for me right now. Find out what's her IP address." "Yes, I understand." Sensing the anxiety in his tone, Lee Hanlin didn't ask any more questions and immediately agreed. Yo-Yo rushed out of the door and chased after Yoon Shusha. At the fork in the road, he deliberated for a few times and a road map appeared in his mind. One road led to the city center, while the other led to the remote southern suburbs. He immediately ran along the secluded road the next day. After running for an unknown amount of time, he saw a person lying on the ground from afar. He was shocked and immediately chased after her. It was only when he got closer that he realized that Shi was unconscious on the ground. "Shi." Yo-Yo stopped in his tracks and walked toward her. After the vigorous exercise, he suddenly stopped. His heart skipped a beat as he felt his heart palpitate. He frowned and clutched his chest tightly. He staggered to her side and half knelt on the ground, his body on the verge of collapsing. He endured the discomfort and reached out to pat her face. "Wake up." For a long time, there was no reaction from her. Chapter 33:17. Yo-Yo leaned against the wall weakly until he saw a pair of high heels lying on the floor not far away. He immediately forced himself to walk over and pick them up. He immediately recognized them as his mommy's high heels. He would occasionally tidy up the cloakroom for his mommy, so he recognized them. "Oh no," Yo-Yo immediately called Lee Hanlin, but the other party replied that they could only trace the IP address to an overseas IP. Hence, their ability was limited and they could not find the final IP address. Even Lee Hanlin could not find it. It seemed that this had something to do with the dark web. A white light flashed across Yo-Yo's mind. He realized something and immediately called Gong Jie via video call. The video call was quickly connected. Gong Jie was a little surprised that he would take the initiative to call, but before he could ask, Yo-Yo quickly explained the situation to him succinctly. The more it was like this, the calmer Yo-Yo was. He knew very well that if he lost his composure, the situation would be even more out of control. Yo-Yo said in a low voice, "I suspect that this matter has something to do with Dietrich." Gong Jie's heart skipped a beat when he heard this. He immediately said, "If it's really Dietrich's doing, then sister is temporarily safe. His target must be you. Yo-Yo, protect yourself well. I'll start investigating right away." "Okay." Yo-Yo ended the call and sent a location to Mu Yaja. However, he soon fainted from exhaustion. After Yun Shusha was forced into the car, her hands were tied behind her back, her eyes were blindfolded, and her mouth was taped. However, even if they did not seal her mouth, she would not foolishly scream. The car drove for a long time. She was on tenterhooks as she did not know where this car was taking her. Kidnapping? Yun Shusha thought carefully and felt that there were many suspicious points about Mu Shi. Especially today, when she stammered and evaded the topic. She looked very guilty, but for some reason, her gaze toward her was filled with regret and hesitation. Previously, when she gave her the invitation, her expression was very strange. She wanted to give it but did not want to at the same time. When she said that she did not want to attend, Mu Shi looked very anxious. When she said that she wanted to attend, Mu Shi's eyes were filled with hesitation and regret. Although it was a charity banquet, the car in charge of picking her up was so far away and so remote. Moreover, when the car stopped beside her, Mu Shi seemed to know that something like this would happen. She even mouthed the words to tell her to run. Yun Shusha recalled the conversation between the two men and Mu Shi. Deal and agreement, these two terms clearly indicated that Mu Shi and these two men knew each other. She was betrayed. Thinking of this possibility, she bit her lower lip in despair. She trusted her assistant so much, but in the end, the person closest to her betrayed her. At this thought, Yun Shusha's heart turned cold. It was as if her blood had been sucked away. Along the way, she kept calculating the distance in her heart. The car drove for more than half an hour. At this speed, they had driven about 60 kilometers. Finally, the car came to a steady stop and she was forced out. Immediately after, she heard the sound of a ship's engine. The pier. The port. Judging the time, it was already evening. Chapter 33:18. She struggled repeatedly as the two men held her down on both sides. According to Mu Shi, the charity banquet was held on a cruise ship. Could it be that they were going to send her on a cruise ship? If that was the case, it would be impossible for her to escape from the vast sea. Should she jump into the sea? That was the same as courting death. To her, a cruise ship was simply a prison on the sea. Her struggles were not worth mentioning to the two men. The more she struggled, the more ruthless they became. With a chop of a hand, she only felt a dull pain at the back of her neck. Her brain instantly went numb and she fainted. When she woke up again, she opened her eyes and found herself in a luxurious room. The thing that was used to cover her eyes and seal her mouth was gone. Beside her, a group of unfamiliar women were busy. Just as she was about to sit up, she realized that the handcuffs on her wrists were still there. She had a splitting headache. It seemed that the man had used too much force in his chop, resulting in the after effects. Her head was throbbing with pain as if her brain was turning upside down. Suddenly, she felt something strange on her body. Half of her shoulder was exposed to the air. She looked down. She didn't know when, but someone had changed her into a dress. It was a strapless fishtail dress that accentuated her exquisite figure. The exquisite and gorgeous outfit made it seem as if she had not been kidnapped but that there was an important and eye-catching banquet waiting for her. "What are you doing?" Yun Shusha questioned them sternly. "What exactly are you doing?" However, the few women in front of her did not seem to hear her. They did not even turn their heads as they busied themselves with the things at hand. Yun Shusha could not help but wonder if they did not exist in the same space as her, or if they were all deaf and could not hear her. A woman dressed as a servant walked over with an expensive diamond necklace in her hand. It seemed that she was going to put it on her. Yun Shusha struggled to retreat and shouted at her at the top of her lungs, "Get lost! "Don't touch me," she shouted so loudly, but the woman in front of her still did not seem to hear her. She was like a puppet that had been wound up and had no emotions of her own. The more this kind of environment was, the more creepy it was. Looking at the expressionless women who looked like walking corpses in front of her, Shusha's heart fell into the abyss of despair. Who could tell her what was going on? "What are you trying to do?" Her voice trembled violently as she stared straight at her. She watched helplessly as she tied the diamond chain around her ankle. It was an anklet. The cold touch made people feel that the beauty of the diamond was extremely strange. The soundproofing of the room was very good. However, Shusha looked around and could vaguely tell that they were on a cruise ship. That was because she could vaguely hear the sound of wind and waves outside the room. On the deck, there were people walking to and fro. Every footstep made her tremble in fear. There was a kind of despair of being alone and helpless, immediately surrounding her. "Help, save me," she shouted helplessly in her heart, but she didn't dare to shout. Every minute and every second passed extremely slowly. However, she didn't know what she was about to face. Chapter 33:19. After the women packed up their things, they left one after another. She was the only one left in the huge and luxurious room. Shusha was in a state of torment. She leaned against the headboard and shivered. She wanted to stay calm, but forgive her. In such an unfamiliar and cold environment, she didn't know if this would be the last moment of her life. After an unknown amount of time, the sound of footsteps came from outside the room. The footsteps stopped outside the door, and the next second, someone pushed the door open and walked in. She saw 2 rows of black-clothed men enter in a single file. The last man who walked in wore a long coat and combed his hair back. He looked old, about 50 years old. His face was full of wrinkles. At the same time, a ferocious-looking blade stretched across half of his face. His facial features were deep, and it was obvious that he wasn't of Asian descent. He wore sunglasses and held a cigar between his fingers. He looked aggressive, and it was obvious that he was a vicious person. One's appearance was born from one's heart. She believed in this saying. Some evil people could be told at a glance that they were evil people who committed all kinds of crimes. For example, this man had a pair of thick, messy eyebrows and downturned lips, giving people an unapproachable feeling. His subordinates seemed to be in awe of him. They kept their heads down and didn't dare to look him in the eye. Shusha looked at him, and her heart skipped a beat. She guessed that it must have been her idea to kidnap her here. She sized him up for a while, and the man was doing the same. He stared at her for a while through his sunglasses. Even with the sunglasses, it couldn't hide his sinister gaze. It was hair-raising. Shusha was a little shocked by his gaze. Her lips trembled as she gritted her teeth and asked, "Who exactly are you?" The man exhaled a puff of smoke. He narrowed his eyes and took off his sunglasses. His eyes were like an eagle's beak, and they were aggressive. When he opened his mouth, a thick smoke came out. However, what came out of his mouth was an authentic American accent in English. This woman's model isn't bad. Shusha knew that he didn't understand English, so she questioned him in fluent English. "Who are you?" "Oh, you can speak English." The man was a little surprised. He raised his hand and took another deep puff of the cigar. Amidst the smoke, he looked at her again and seemed to be very satisfied. "You don't need to know who I am. Then, why did you bring me here?" "Haha. You don't have to ask about this." "Why can't I ask?" The man smiled coldly and snorted. "Because you are an object. Because you are an item. An object doesn't need to think." Shusha's heart skipped a beat when she heard this. She was even more confused and couldn't figure out what his purpose was. Item? She was not an object at all. Shusha wanted to say something, but the man turned around and quickly left the room. The door closed again, isolating her from the world. Shusha sat on the spot in a daze, her heart in a state of extreme panic. The sound of the waves outside the window became clearer and clearer. She closed her eyes in despair. She only hoped that she would be taken away from here as soon as possible. When Yo-Yo woke up, he was in the hospital. Mu Yaja and Xiaoichen were sitting by the bed. When they saw that he had woken up, They immediately surrounded him. Chapter 33:20. Xiao Chen asked, Yo-Yo, are you alright? By the time Daddy and I arrived, you had already fainted. You scared me out of my wits. Yo-Yo immediately sat up and surveyed his surroundings. Realizing that he was in a hospital, he asked anxiously, what time is it now? 9 p.m. 9 p.m.? It had been 3 hours since they lost contact with his mother. Yo-Yo broke out in a cold sweat. He did not know if his mother was safe or not. For 3 hours, no news was the best news. He suspected that this was Dietrich's doing. If that was the case, then he must have taken his mother away to target him. What if that was not the case? If the person who kidnapped Mommy wasn't Dietrich, then Mommy's safety wouldn't be guaranteed. Where is she? Yo-Yo immediately looked up. Where's Mushi? Mu Yaja coldly replied, she's already awake. Is she under control? Yes, she's right outside. Yo-Yo immediately lifted the blanket and got out of bed. He did not even bother to put on his shoes as he walked to the door. Mushi had woken up and was sitting on the bench with a dazed look on her face. 3 or 4 men stood around her, watching her intently. Yo-Yo's face turned cold when he saw her. He quickly walked up to her, grabbed her collar, and pulled her to him. Mommy trusted you so much, but what about you? What did you do to her? Yo-Yo enunciated each word clearly. You betrayed her. You betrayed her. Mushi's face broke down when she heard this. Tears rolled down her cheeks continuously. I know, but I really had no choice. I didn't want to. I don't want to hear this nonsense. Yo-Yo questioned sternly, who took Mommy away? Who are those people? Tell me everything you know. Mushi shook her head in despair. I don't know. I really don't know anything. Just now, Mu Yaja had interrogated him, but he didn't get any useful information. Mushi told him everything she knew and what she could, but the information she got was very little. Mu Yaja did not know what had happened. Mushi was incoherent throughout and could not provide any information. That person only asked me to send Shusha to the port under the pretext of attending the charity banquet. I didn't want to at first, but he video called me. I saw with my own eyes my father being tied up in the dark room and one of his fingers being chopped off while he was still alive. Mushi recalled that scene and was scared out of her wits. She immediately agreed to do as he instructed. That person said that if she didn't do as he asked, he wouldn't be able to guarantee what he would do to her father in the next video call. This is too cruel. She cried herself hoarse. I was scared out of my wits. I was scared, so I acted foolishly. I know I'm in the wrong. I know I'm in the wrong. I didn't know it would cause such serious consequences. Yo-Yo was even more furious. Then, why didn't you say anything? Since you know that that person is cruel, how can you bear to put my mommy through a mountain of swords and a sea of fire? Mushi was stunned and her tears flowed even more violently. I don't want to see your hypocritical tears. Chapter 33:21. Mushi trembled in fear. Even though the person standing before her was no more than 8 years old, the aura he exuded was enough to stun her. Mu Yaja pulled him into his embrace and gently caressed his hair as he consoled, Yo-Yo, don't be afraid, even though, at this moment, his heart was in a mess. Yo-Yo trembled in anger. He thought of how heartbroken his mommy would be if she found out that he had been betrayed by Mushi. Muachen said, Yo-Yo, don't worry. No news is the best news for now. It's just that we're all in the dark now. We can't find Mommy's whereabouts, let alone know who the mastermind is. Still, I think that the mastermind is using Mommy as a hostage to negotiate with someone. After a pause, he asked Muyaja suspiciously, Daddy, have you offended anyone recently? Muyaja pursed his lips and shook his head. No. Yo-Yo clenched his fists and said solemnly, maybe. I'm right. What? It must be Dietrich. His sixth sense could not be wrong. His phone rang all of a sudden. Yo-Yo thought that it was a video call from Gongjie. He quickly took out his phone, only to see an unfamiliar IP call pop up on the screen. His heart skipped a beat and he picked it up without hesitation. Following the frequency of the call, the video gradually changed. In the video, a man was sitting on a chair, and a ferocious face came into view. He. Little guy, how have you been? Mu Yaja furrowed his brows in shock. This man's face was very unfamiliar, so he naturally could not recognize him. However, this did not mean that Yo-Yo could not recognize him. Dietrich? Yo-Yo had not seen Dietrich's face before, so he raised a brow in suspicion. So smart. I couldn't believe it. I even doubted if the legendary genius of the Hurricane Group was really only 8 years old. I only believed it when I saw it with my own eyes. In the video, Dietrich was in a dark environment, which was probably used to store miscellaneous items on the cruise ship. Even though the video's resolution was limited, he could still see the dust flying in the air. She raised her head when she heard the voice. Even though his voice when he spoke to her earlier, it was too easy to recognize this man's voice. It was gloomy, hoarse, and chilling. It's him. She recognized him. She moved closer to the phone and stared at the man's face as she yelled, "What did you do to Shusha?" She was speaking in Chinese, but Dietrich didn't understand Chinese, so he misunderstood her meaning. "Do you want to see your parents?" "Sure." Dietrich signaled with his eyes, and the camera quickly turned to the other side. Under the dim light, She saw with her own eyes that her parents were tied to an iron pillar with iron chains tightly binding them. There were no injuries on their bodies. It seemed that Dietrich did not torture them too much. However, after being imprisoned for a long time, their mental state looked terrible. Their heads were hung low, and it was unknown if they were awake or unconscious. It was unknown whether they were dead or alive. Yo-Yo finally understood why She did this. It turned out that Dietrich had kidnapped her parent. Despicable. Shameless. Cunning old fox. Chapter 33-22. She's facial muscles twitched as she gritted her teeth. Hating this man to the core, she shouted at the top of her lungs, "Let them go now." Yo-Yo replied coldly, "He won't let them go." "What? Who do you think he is? A philanthropist? Don't even think about living once they're in his hands." The next second, Dietrich's voice was heard in the video. "According to our agreement, I should have let them go. However, it's a pity that you've broken your promise. Our deal is no longer valid. What I promised you naturally doesn't count, either." She, who did not understand English, was at a loss. However, she soon saw two men step forward and untie the ropes binding them. They then fell limply to the ground. "Ah," she cried out nervously. She saw two men holding her father and mother by the collar and walking to a cabin door. They opened the cabin door, and as the cruise ship sailed through the wind and waves, the blue waves came into view. She finally understood what this man was trying to do. She screamed, "No." Before she could finish her words, the man in the video kicked her mother out of the door. Her body sank heavily into the sea and was quickly swallowed by it. She watched this scene in disbelief. She fell to the ground in a daze as big drops of tears rolled down her cheeks. Her whole body trembled violently as she looked at the camera again. In the video, She's father woke up abruptly. He looked at the man and opened his mouth to scream, "Ah, ah, ah." She thought that he was too frightened to speak, but Yo-Yo knew very well that the reason he was screaming was not just out of fear but because his tongue had been cut off. How cruel. Yo-Yo clenched his fists tightly. The next second, She's father was pushed out of the door. His body sank into the sea, but he quickly floated up. He kept struggling, but he was soon swallowed by the waves created by the cruise ship. She broke down and screamed, "No." The cabin door was closed. Dietrich's cruel methods were hair-raising. Chen was dumbfounded as his heart clenched tightly. He was not in the mood to care about She's parents. Instead, he was worried about Yoon Shusha's safety. Dietrich was vicious and merciless. He did not say a word of nonsense. Just like the scene just now, he was ruthless and decisive. There was almost no hesitation in killing them. It was as if two lives were as lowly as grass in his eyes. There was no doubt about this, though. After all, he was the boss behind the dark web. His business of kidnapping women from all over the world and selling them at a high price. Even Chen, who had seen many deaths, was frightened out of his wits by this scene. Yu gritted his teeth. "Where's my mommy? Do you want to see her?" Dietrich laughed coldly. But unfortunately, She will be the highlight of the auction. Auction? The boy was shocked. What do you want? This lunatic. Beatrice, she's death, do you know? I lost a total of 3 billion USD because of you. Yo-Yo pursed his lips tightly and said in a low voice, 3 billion, is it? I'll compensate you. Oh. Do you have the money to do that? Give me one night. I'll prepare it immediately. Chapter 33:23. One night. Haha. I can't wait that long. Beatrice proposed a deal. I'll only give you 2 hours. 2 hours. It was impossible to prepare so much cash at once. Beatrice was demanding an exorbitant price. It was not that he did not have the ability to fulfill it, but the reality was that it was already the middle of the night. Even if there was an account turnover, there would be backstage operations. What he wanted was cash. Where would he get so much? 3 billion USD? Not every bank had such a shocking amount of foreign reserves. Moreover, the banks were closed now. If he urgently informed the bank management that he needed to withdraw 3 billion USD in cash, it would be as difficult as ascending to the heaven. Moreover, he had to appear at the port in 2 hours. Otherwise, his mother's safety would be in danger. However, if he relied on the Hurricane Group, 3 billion would not be difficult. As far as he knew, most of the transactions of the Hurricane Group were cash transactions. Therefore, for the Hurricane Group, it would not be difficult to come up with 3 billion in cash. However, it would take some time for the Gongjie to arrive from the Hurricane Group. Beatrice said, remember, I want cash. 2 hours later, I'll send someone to pick you up at the port. If you can't wait for the 3 billion, don't blame me. It's not like I didn't give you a chance. Yo-Yo could not care less and agreed immediately. Okay. I promise you. Remember, 2 hours later, you have to come alone with cash. If you bring someone else, my bullets won't have eyes. Beatrice was very cunning. He knew that one more person meant one more danger. If it was a child, he could still control it. However, if he brought an adult, there would be more uncertainty. He was not stupid enough to take the risk. I want to see the person first. Yo-Yo requested. Beatrice laughed when he heard that. You think I'm negotiating with you? We're both businessmen. You've put forward your terms, so why can't I put forward my terms? You're wrong. This is not a transaction. Even if it's a ransom, you have to let me see that the person is safe. Dream on. Beatrice was firm. Remember, I'm only giving you 2 hours. If you don't come in 2 hours, you can wait to collect the corpse. Haha. At the last moment of the video, it stopped at Beatrice's cold and arrogant laughter. After ending the call, Yo-Yo bit her lip and looked up at Muyaja. Daddy, can you prepare so much cash within an hour? 3 billion? Muyaja took a deep breath. Time is a little tight, but it's not like we can't think of a way. What he said meant that it was impossible to raise so much cash within an hour. He was well aware of Muyaja's financial situation. He had 3 billion USD in foreign exchange reserves. However, even if he had the authority, it was impossible for him to withdraw so much cash in such a short time. Beatrice was giving him a hard time. What did this mean? It meant that he already had a plan for the next step. There's no time. Yo-Yo said, if you really don't have enough time to prepare, it's okay. I'll go alone. No. Muyaja rejected her without thinking. How are you going to get there? If he went alone, he would just be throwing his life away. Chapter 33:24. Of course, it's to negotiate with him. How are you going to negotiate with him if you don't have a single cent? Although Beatrice's methods are cruel, he will never make a losing deal. He won't kill me so easily. I'm doing this to buy time. Yo-Yo paused for a moment and said, I've already contacted Uncle. If nothing goes wrong, he should be here tomorrow morning. Impossible. Muyaja was resolute. Even if someone has to go, it should be me. Daddy, the person Beatrice wants to meet is me. This is between him and me. Mommy's life is in his hands now. You won't be of any help if you go. The person Beatrice wanted was him. He knew very well that if Muyaja rashly went, he would only anger that cunning old man. But he was different. Beatrice was targeting him. He was confident and believed in Mu Yaja and Gong Jie. The purpose of leaving Mu Yaja behind was to let him help Gong Jie. He was going to buy time. Opportunity always came with danger. How could one catch a tiger cub without entering the tiger's den? Yo-Yo smirked and said, "This is my fault. It's my fault for not killing him. I implicated Mommy. Since that's the case, I should take responsibility." Mu Yaja squatted down and grabbed his shoulders tightly. "You want me to watch you take the risk? I won't be stupid enough to do something I'm not confident in. Daddy, don't you know me?" Yo-Yo pretended to be relaxed. "Daddy, don't tell me you don't believe me." Mu Yaja was silent for a moment. Mu Chen suddenly said, "Daddy, I'll go with Yo-Yo." "No." Yo-Yo said, "You can't go. You'll be sending yourself to death." "Yo-Yo, we can't go without either of us. I'll go with you. Trust me, I can definitely protect you and Mommy." "Are you crazy?" Yo-Yo said angrily. "Do you know where that is? Do you even understand him? Do you know how dangerous a person he is? You say it so casually, but the real situation is very dangerous. Do you understand?" "Of course I know." Mu Chen interrupted him. Holding his hand, he smiled and said, "That's why I want to be with you. It's because I know it's very dangerous, so I can't let you go alone." He held Yo-Yo's hand tightly, his eyes filled with sincerity. "Yo-Yo, listen to your brother, okay? Otherwise, I'll feel like a useless person." Yo-Yo looked at him and saw the determination in his eyes. He couldn't refuse anymore. The telepathy between the twins allowed him to see Mu Chen's firm conviction. Suddenly, he held his hand tightly and smiled. "Okay, let's go together then." Mu Chen was elated. Seeing that Yo-Yo had finally relented, he nodded heavily. Yo-Yo said to Mu Yaja, "Daddy, you'll be in charge of sending us to the port. Then, get Uncle as soon as possible. Xiao Chen and I will be waiting for you." "Impossible." Mu Yaja gritted his teeth and said, "I can't do it." He couldn't do it if he went with them and his life was uncertain. He couldn't lose any of them. Chapter 33-25. Yo-Yo suddenly hugged him and hugged his shoulders. His eyes were red as he said, "Daddy, I'm begging you, okay? Trust me this time and trust your two sons' abilities." Mu Yaja clenched his fists tightly. He suddenly released them and gently hugged the two little lads. "Wait for me." "Okay." 2 o'clock in the morning. It was midnight. The night was dark and gloomy. Dark clouds covered the moon and it looked like it was going to rain heavily. The car sent Yo-Yo and Xiao Chen to the harbor early and left quickly. Xiao Chen held onto Yo-Yo's hand tightly and didn't want to let go. The two little lads stood at the harbor. The night wind was very strong and the cold sea breeze made their cheeks hurt. "Yo-Yo, do you know? Actually, I'm not stupid at all. Most of the time, I know a lot. It's not like I don't know how to solve those math problems." Yo-Yo was stunned and turned to look at him. Memories of their first encounter flashed through his mind. The two of them sat on the Ferris wheel and faced each other. He clumsily counted with his fingers in front of Yo-Yo when they were faced with a math problem. Yo-Yo mocked him mercilessly. "You're not smart enough, so you're using your height to make up for it." From the first time they met, Xiao Chen had the impression that he was stupid. "What's 4 plus 5 plus 6 plus 7 plus 8 plus 9 plus 10? I'll give you 10 seconds to figure it out." Little Chen immediately began to count them one by one with a serious look on his face. Yo-Yo looked at him speechlessly. He thought to himself, did this brother of mine really come from the same womb as me? How can he be so stupid? But what was the truth? Xiao Chen wasn't stupid. On the contrary, he was very smart and knew how to pretend to be stupid. That was why he had an excuse to pester Yo-Yo and kept asking him to teach him math problems. At that time, Yo-Yo wasn't close to him and his daddy. It seemed that this was the only way to get close to his arrogant younger brother. However, as the older brother, he always seemed to be looked down upon by his younger brother. Now, he didn't want to be looked down upon. He wanted Yo-Yo to know that even though he wasn't as smart as him, he had the ability to protect him and his mommy. "Yo-Yo, Daddy, Mommy, and I lived together, in the same house, together, what do you think?" He still remembered how he stood in front of him and confessed his feelings. I like it very much. I like Mommy and I like you. I want to live together as a family, like this. That's the feeling of home, isn't it? Yo, I definitely won't snatch your mommy from you. On the contrary, you'll still have Daddy's love and my love. Between the three of us, we'll spoil you, okay? Yo snapped out of his thoughts and smiled, but his eyes were tearing up. He was a clear-minded person. How could he not know that Xiao Ichen was pretending to be stupid? As the older brother, he was deliberately giving in to him. No matter how much he bullied him, Xiao Ichen would just laugh it off. Look. Xiao Ichen raised his wrist and waved it in front of Yo-Yo. Do you still remember this necklace? Under the moonlight, the amethyst necklace on Mu Ichen's wrist shone brightly. Of course I remember. Yo-Yo raised his wrist and put it together with Yo-Yo's. The identical amethyst necklace on both wrists was beautiful and in sync. Chapter 33:26. I swear I'll protect you forever. Little Ichen's fingers interlocked with his brother's tightly. The twins had a tacit understanding of each other, so there was no need for words. They could understand each other's hearts. Not far away, the sound of a ship's engine could be heard. However, the cruise ship did not approach the port. Instead, it sent a yacht over. Yo-Yo held onto him with one hand and carried the suitcase with the other until the yacht sailed towards them. There were two men on the yacht. When they approached the port, they were shocked to see two identical children standing together. Why were there two children? Wasn't there only one? Moreover, where was the 3 billion in cash that they agreed on? Don't tell him that the money was in the suitcase that the child was carrying. How much money could such a small suitcase contain? The two children looked too similar. In the past, Yo-Yo was much shorter than Xiao Ichen. However, in the past year, Yo-Yo had grown rapidly and was gradually catching up to Xiao Ichen's height. The two of them were almost the same height, so it was even harder to tell them apart. Why are there two? The man muttered in English. Yo-Yo said calmly, isn't it better to have two people as hostages? This isn't a losing deal. The man immediately picked up the radio and made a call. It was obviously to Dietrich. No one knew what he said. After hanging up, he came ashore and snorted coldly. No matter how many people there are, we have to follow the rules. Yo-Yo handed the suitcase to him calmly. How much is here? Yo-Yo said calmly, $500 million. The man took the suitcase and was about to open it when he realized that there was a combination lock. This combination lock was different from other common combination locks. This combination lock consisted of 5 digits and an iris recognition system. It was difficult to crack a 5-digit combination lock. Moreover, it was set up by Yo-Yo. Combination lock. The man ordered in broken Chinese, what's the combination? Who do you think you are? You can't tell me the password until I see your leader in person. Yo-Yo wasn't stupid. He knew that if he wasn't prepared to pay that much money, Dietrich wouldn't let him board the cruise ship. Then, he wouldn't be able to see his mother, let alone negotiate with Dietrich. Therefore, he specially prepared $500 million. That phone call just now was the man following Dimitri's instructions on how to deal with it. However, from the looks of it, his guess was right. If he took the briefcase away, there was no need for him and Mu Ichen to keep their lives. Yo-Yo saw a gun on his waist. That gun must be used to end his life. Dietrich must have told his subordinate to kill him as soon as he got the cash. Therefore, he had specially set up a strict password lock. Of course, he would not hand over the password lock so easily. Otherwise, once he got the money, they would be shot on the spot and their bodies would be thrown into the sea. Yo-Yo had made a careful plan beforehand. He even knew Dietrich's trump card. This man was so cunning that he had to be on guard. Otherwise, he wouldn't have brought Mu Ichen into danger. The man was indeed annoyed. He immediately pulled out his gun and pressed it against Yo-Yo's forehead. He said fiercely, "Are you playing with me?" Chapter 33:27. You've misunderstood. How dare I joke around with my life? Be smart and hand over the password. If I tell you the password, I'll be shot between my eyebrows by this gun in your hand and drown in the sea. His words were truly shocking. The man widened his eyes and immediately reacted. He pressed the muzzle of the gun even tighter. Do you believe that I'll kill you right now? The cold pistol was emitting cold air from the pitch-black hole. Muo-chen was so nervous that he broke out in a cold sweat. He was even prepared to grab the gun at any moment. Yo-Yo was calm enough. Instead, he smiled and said, "If you kill me, your boss's $3 billion will be gone." Oh, right, I forgot to mention that other than me, no one else can open this password-protected box. Let me board the ship. Yo-Yo opened his arms and said calmly, "I have a deal that I want to discuss with your boss." The man looked at him suspiciously. Then, he put the gun away and began to search Yo-Yo and Xiao Ichen's bodies. When he was sure that they were not carrying any equipment or weapons, he snorted coldly. "Give me your hands." Muo-chen did not understand what he meant. Yo-Yo raised his hands and allowed the man to handcuff his wrists. The latter immediately understood and obediently extended his hands, allowing his wrists to be handcuffed. The two little munchkins boarded the yacht successfully. As soon as Muo-chen and Yo-Yo boarded the yacht, they were led to the VIP cabin. The yacht was huge. It was a few hundred meters from the entrance to the VIP cabin where Dietrich was. When a door opened, Muo-chen and Yo-Yo walked in. Dietrich was sitting on the leather sofa. When he saw the two little munchkins, he asked in confusion, "Why are there two of you? Hey, why are there two kids?" Yo-Yo raised her head and met Dimitri's eyes expressionlessly. "Dimitri, we finally meet. The other one is..." "You don't need to know who it is." Yo-Yo looked up and said to Dietrich, "Now, can you remove the handcuffs on our hands?" Dietrich looked at him warily. Yo-Yo tilted her head innocently and said contemptuously, "Don't tell me you're afraid of two weak children. What a joke." Immediately, someone unlocked the handcuffs on Yo-Yo and Xiao Ichen. Yo-Yo naturally sat down opposite him. She smiled and said, "Mr. Dietrich, due to Hurricane Group's negligence, we're deeply sorry for the losses we've caused you. So, we're here to express our gratitude." Yo-Yo signaled with her eyes. Xiao Ichen immediately understood and walked forward. She placed a suitcase on the table and unlocked it in front of everyone. She slowly pushed the suitcase full of US dollars in front of Dietrich. Dietrich glanced at them indifferently and couldn't help but frown. The US dollars were stacked neatly in the suitcase. $500 million was not a small sum, but compared to the amount Dietrich had requested, it was nowhere near enough. Moreover, compared to the amount he had lost, it was not even worth mentioning. Chapter 33-28. Dietrich was an ambitious capitalist. He was cunning and greedy by nature. How could he be satisfied with such a small amount? He leaned back leisurely on the sofa, swirling the wine glass in his hand. He glanced expressionlessly at Yo-Yo, who was sitting elegantly in front of him, and snorted. "This is your so-called sincerity." Yo-Yo smiled and said calmly, "That's right, Mr. Dietrich. After all, I've caused you quite a bit of loss, so this is a token of my sincerity." "A token of my sincerity? A token of my sincerity?" Heh, what did this brat think he was? A philanthropist? Token of my sincerity? Heh. Dietrich couldn't help but laugh out loud. He took a sip of red wine and slowly stood up. He walked up to him, leaned forward slightly, and looked down at him. He asked coldly, "A mere $500 million. How does it compare to the amount I've lost?" Dietrich's eyes were calm. He smiled and said, "Of course it's insignificant. But Mr. Dietrich, don't you think it's too much to ask me to prepare so much money in 2 hours?" Dietrich narrowed his eyes, revealing a beast-like sharpness. He curled his lips coldly and laughed mockingly. He waved his hand and smashed the wine glass in his hand at Yo-Yo's head. Bang! The entire wine cup was smashed to pieces. The scarlet red wine dripped down the tip of his hair. "Is this your so-called sincerity?" he roared in disdain. "Yo-Yo." Muo-chen turned pale with fright as he pounced over in trepidation. Yo-Yo was still sitting calmly on the sofa. He didn't make a sound. His lips were still curled into a gentle smile, but his face was a little haggard. The crimson-red wine mixed with viscous blood flowed down from his forehead, soaking half of his jade-like face. A strand of chestnut hair on his forehead was stained with blood and flowed into his eye socket. His entire left eye immediately turned crimson red. With one eye closed and the other half open, he calmly looked at Dietrich without the slightest hint of panic. When Mu-Chen saw this, anger rose from his heart. He suddenly stood up and glared at Dietrich. He wanted nothing more than to throw a punch at this face. As he watched this man humiliate Yo-Yo, he was naturally furious. Yo-Yo narrowed his left eye and raised his hand to stop him. He said calmly, "Brother, don't be impulsive." Xiao Ichen was indignant. He gritted his teeth and turned around. "But, Yo-Yo, you're bleeding. Eyes. Are eyes important? Did the glass get into your eyes? It's okay. Sit down." Mu-Chen gritted his teeth and finally stepped back unwillingly. Yo-Yo calmly rolled up his sleeves and casually wiped the blood and wine off his face. He smiled at Fei Lian. "Dietrich, I'm very sorry about this. I also know that your loss is not something that can be compensated with a mere 500 million. But don't you think that what you did, kidnapping a weak woman to threaten her, is really ungentlemanly?" Even though he was in such a sorry state, he still maintained perfect etiquette. The smile on his face was elegant and charming, and there was no trace of disappointment. Even Dietrich couldn't help but be stunned. Chapter 33-29. However, it only lasted for a moment before he regained his composure and a look of disdain appeared on his face. Dietrich turned around and returned to the sofa. He sat down slowly and snorted at him. "Manners? Mph, you're just a little thing. Do you know how to behave?" Yo-Yo smiled and said, "I'm still young and inexperienced. Compared to you, I haven't seen much of the world. Naturally, I'm not good enough. If I've offended you in any way, please forgive me and don't hold it against me. We have a long future ahead of us. Don't let such a small matter ruin our friendship." Friendship. This little guy was smart. He knew that he couldn't make enemies with him and wanted to befriend him. "Since you said you wanted to make a deal with me, what's the deal about?" Yo-Yo said, $3 billion and let my mommy go." "Huh. Since you said it's a deal, where's the $3 billion? I've already said that it's too much to prepare within 2 hours." "That's too much," Dietrich said coldly. "Since you said it's a deal, we'll give you the money and you deliver the goods. That's the rule. I don't care what methods you use. If you don't get it, then you're breaking the contract." The man's sinister gaze fell on him as he said this. He couldn't help but feel suspicious. "You didn't even prepare the money. Who gave you the courage to come?" He was digging his own grave. "Even if I didn't prepare anything, I should show my sincerity." Yo-Yo smiled. "Moreover, my mommy's life is still unknown. I should at least confirm with my own eyes that she's safe and sound. Only then can I fulfill my promise to you." Xiao Ichen immediately stood up and said, "Let us see mommy." Dietrich glanced at Mu-Chen and furrowed his brows. Mu-Chen was obviously extremely worried. He lost control and said, "I want to see my mommy. Let me see her." Dietrich raised his brows and tapped his fingers on the sofa's armrest. He laughed and said, "What a filial child. It's rare for someone to be so protective of their mother." He gently waved his hand, and one of his men immediately stepped forward. With a bang, he threw a punch. Xiao Ichen was caught off guard and was hit squarely by the punch. His body fell to the ground, and the huge force caused his head to shake. He shook his head, but in the end, he couldn't withstand it and fainted. Since he wants to see his dear mother, let him see her. Yo-Yo stood up nervously. "What are you doing?" The subordinate beside him immediately raised his leg and swept him to the ground. Yo-Yo frowned in pain, but did not make a sound. He gritted his teeth and raised his head. Dietrich said coldly, "Go and lock this little thing up with that woman." "Understood." The subordinate walked over and grabbed Xiao Chen's collar with one hand, easily lifting him up and dragging him out. The door closed again, leaving only Yo-Yo and Dietrich. Yo-Yo looked worriedly in the direction of the door. His face was full of fear, but there was a victorious smile in his eyes. He struggled to get up from the ground and said, "Give me 5 hours. I'll fulfill my promise." Chapter 33-30. Dietrich narrowed his eyes dangerously. You want to talk terms with me? Yo-Yo smirked. I'm in a weaker position now. What right do I have to talk terms with you? You can take this as a request. He struggled to get up and walked to the table. He pushed the suitcase over and said slowly, the money here is a token of my sincerity. Please give me 5 hours. After 5 hours, I'll prepare 3 billion and present it to you. Dietrich suddenly stood up and grabbed him by the collar. He pulled him in front of him and said darkly, after 5 hours? Brat, you can't be playing some kind of trick with me, right? How would I dare to play tricks with you? Yo-Yo's collar was grabbed by him and his throat was locked by his collar. He was a little out of breath and his face was slightly red from suffocation. However, he still said calmly, my mother and brother are in your hands. With these 2 bargaining chips in my hands, how would I dare? Dietrich stared deeply into his eyes. Suddenly, his lips parted, and a sinister smile appeared on his face. Ha ha ha. All right. Dietrich let go of his collar. I'll give you 5 hours. Don't disappoint me. If there's even 1 cent less, don't blame me for throwing the 3 of you into the sea to feed the fish. Yo-Yo heard this and finally heaved a sigh of relief. He looked at Dietrich and his back was covered in cold sweat. He smiled and said, thank you. There was a huge cellar under the cruise ship. It had always been used as a warehouse. A few crew members dragged Mu-Ichen by the collar and dragged him to the cellar. They opened the lock. Damn it. It smells like mold. In the cellar, there was a huge iron cage. This kind of iron cage was usually used to transport beasts or rare animals. In Dietrich's case, it was used to smuggle people. Yoon Shusha was trapped in the cage. Although the cage had been wiped clean, the smell of blood could still be smelled. Needless to say, this cage had taken someone's life before. However, she did not feel afraid. Or rather, she had a certain conviction in her heart. Heaven helps the worthy. At least, she knew in her heart that she would not die for the time being. Even though she couldn't figure out the intentions of the man who locked her up here, she vaguely realized that he ordered people to dress her up in such beautiful clothes to show off to others. Auction. She had heard the word pop from his lips. Yoon Shusha would never have thought that Dietrich was planning to auction her alive. As for this cage, it was because a living person was disobedient and was beaten to death. How could she have known that in this world, there existed such a dark network and such a terrifying auction? Put this brat in a cage. Mu-Ichen opened his eyes slightly. Along the way, Mu-Ichen had been silently familiarizing himself with the terrain. Even though his eyes were closed, he was still able to draw a complete map in his mind. Realizing that he was already in the cellar, his right hand slowly touched his waist belt. Previously, before boarding the ship, Dietrich's subordinates had searched his entire body but didn't find any suspicious weapons. That was because his weapons were hidden in an unknown place. Chapter 33-31. He wore a belt on his pants. The belt was just an ordinary belt, but the buckle was not simple. When Yoon Shusha saw someone enter with a child in his hand, she had a bad premonition. Until she saw the child in the man's hand, she screamed in shock. Before she could finish her sentence, Xiao-Ichen opened his eyes slightly and gave her a look. Yoon Shusha immediately shut her mouth and clutched the iron bars tightly as her heart trembled with fear. The crew member threw him to the ground and tried to kick him a few times. Seeing that he didn't react, they assumed that he was a child and wouldn't be a threat. Hence, they walked to the other cage and opened the lock. Now was the time. Mu-Ichen flipped over and landed firmly on the ground. He casually grabbed the buckle, pulled it off, and pressed the mechanism. A sharp blade immediately popped out from the metal buckle. He looked around and saw that there were 6 people in total. When the crew heard the commotion behind them, they turned around abruptly, only to see Mu-Ichen standing behind them with a sharp dagger in his hand. Their faces turned pale with fright. Damn it, where did this brat get the dagger? Take him down. 2 tall and burly men immediately pounced on him. They originally thought that the child would be scared witless, but they didn't expect Xiao-Ichen to charge at them. The 2 men immediately took out their machetes and slashed at him. Xiao-Ichen nimbly dodged their attacks and grabbed the man in front. He gripped the man's wrist tightly with such force that the man cried out in pain. The machete fell to the ground with a clang. Ah! Xiao Ichen sneered and jumped up. His hands held the man's waist tightly, and he used the man's strength to twist his legs around the man's neck like a pair of scissors. He twisted his neck fiercely and spun it in a dazzling manner. The man's neck was tightly gripped. Then, he felt a sharp pain as the inertia threw him to the ground. His back slammed heavily against the ground, as if his spine was about to break. Xiao Ichen raised his hand and slit his throat with the sharp dagger. Blood spurted out. From the moment he made his move to the moment he killed his opponent, it took him less than 10 seconds. Fast, accurate, and ruthless, every move made one's scalp tingle. No one would have thought that a little brat would have such powerful skills. Such a small fellow was actually such a ruthless character. Go! The man gave another order and fumbled for his gun. One of the men picked up a scimitar from the ground and charged at him. Be careful. When Yun Shusha saw another man stabbing him with a knife, he was so scared that he almost suffocated. Xiao Ichen curled his lips and didn't turn around. Based on the sound of footsteps behind him, he turned around and performed a beautiful and clean roundhouse kick. It accurately hit the man's face, and the man fell to the ground with a thud. His nose was broken. The man fell to the ground. He covered his nose and wailed in pain. Xiao Ichen reached out, grabbed him by the collar, and viciously punched his throat. The man's throat made a strange sound. His eyes widened, his face stiffened, and he stopped breathing. Xiao Ichen looked up and heard the sound of a gun being loaded. From the corner of his eye, he saw a cold glint flash across his face. Chapter 33-32. The moonlight shone in through the skylight. The remaining crew members held their guns tightly and aimed them at him. They shouted in broken Chinese, "Don't move. They have guns." Xiao Ichen's lips stiffened. He slowly stood up and raised his hands above his head with a cold expression. "Put the knife down," the man shouted at the top of his lungs again. It was as if the person standing in front of them wasn't an 8-year-old child, but a demon. Mu Ichen tilted his head. The corners of his lips curled into a devilish smile, as if he didn't understand. The man gestured with his hands and said, "Put the knife down." Little Ichen replied with an "oh" and pretended to put down the dagger in his hand. Only then did they relax a little. However, this slight relaxation caused him to narrow his eyes abruptly. The dagger in his hand flew out and drew a dazzling arc in the air. With a swoosh, it ruthlessly pierced one of the men's neck. Blood splattered on the ground. He wanted to shoot, but his body had already collapsed. The remaining 2 men panicked. They were so frightened that they were about to lose their minds. In their panic, they fired blindly and lost their aim. Little Ichen stretched out his leg and hooked the corpse on the ground with the tip of his toe. He pulled it up and used it as a shield in front of him. His right leg hooked onto the machete that had fallen not far away. He hooked it up, caught it firmly with his hand, and threw it back. Compared to the 2 good-for-nothings, Little Ichen had undergone rigorous training. Coupled with his calmness in the face of danger, he did not panic at all even when he was outnumbered. He aimed accurately at one of the men's chest and viciously plunged his dagger into it. The remaining man raised his gun with trembling hands. However, he realized that he had already fired all 6 bullets in the panic. He hurriedly wanted to reload, but Xiao Ichen was already walking towards him. He was quick to change the magazine, load the gun, and fire. Mu Ichen suddenly grabbed his wrist and pointed his gun to the side. Bang! 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 All 3 bullets hit the other man. Mu Ichen lifted his leg and kicked the man's crotch. The man cried out. His legs tightened and clamped down. Xiao Ichen jumped up and grabbed the man's hair. He dragged the man by his hair and walked towards the metal cage. Clang! A loud sound was heard. The man was in so much pain that he felt dizzy. "Spare me! Spare me!" Mu Ichen did not have the patience to listen to his nonsense, though. Grabbing the man's jaw with one hand and his neck with the other, he twisted his neck viciously. The man's throat joint was immediately dislocated. With a whimper, the man's head drooped weakly as he fell to the ground. The scene was a mess, and the pungent smell of gunpowder filled the entire cellar. Mu Ichen slowly stood up and surveyed the corpses on the ground. He carefully checked them again until he was sure that they were all dead. Finally, he heaved a sigh of relief and calmed himself down before walking over to his mother. Yun Shusha was so shocked that she couldn't speak. Xiao Ichen immediately comforted her. "Mommy, don't be afraid. You'll be fine." He lowered his head and looked at the lock of the metal cage to study it. Yun Shusha still had a lingering fear. She couldn't help but tremble with fear when she thought about how the 6 of them were against him. Mu Ichen locked the cellar door from the inside to ensure that no one would barge in. He then focused on studying the lock in his hand. "Ichen. You. Why are you here?" Chapter 33-33. You. Why are you here? Yun Shusha was still in shock. Xiao Ichen stuck out his tongue playfully and said, "Of course I'm here to save Mommy. Mommy, don't be afraid. I'll get you out right away." So effective, she looked at him with emotion. She was scared witless by the earlier scene. Even though she had witnessed Mu Ichen's formidable fighting skills, she would crumble if he were to suffer even the slightest bit of injury. There was a lock on the iron cage. Mu Ichen studied it for a long time and decided to try picking the lock. Even though such a lock could be opened with a gun, if he was not careful, he could accidentally hurt his mommy. After pondering for a long time, he suddenly opened the watch and broke off the needle inside. Using the thin needle, he bent it slightly with his fingers and inserted it into the lock. He held it and turned it. It was different from the locks he used to train with in the army. There was still some difficulty in picking this lock. After all, locks were different in different eras. With the change in technology, many of the lock-picking techniques from the past were no longer suitable for today's technology. Mu Ichen studied it for a long time. He lowered his head and pressed his ear against the lock to listen carefully to the mechanical structure inside. Generally speaking, the internal structure of a lock was very complicated. The better the lock, the more detailed the internal structure. The key shaft, the lock core, the lock tongue, the groove, the push plate, the blade, there were more than 10 parts. If one was not very familiar with locks, they would not be able to understand the main points. However, no matter what kind of lock it was, it could definitely be picked. This was because there was no technology in the world that could make a perfect lock. The perfect tool to pick a lock would be a paper clip. However, he did not carry such a tool with him. The length of the needle on the watch was limited and so was its stiffness. Hence, he had to be careful and hold his breath to listen to the movements inside and make a judgment based on the sound. Yun Shusha also kept quiet and looked at him nervously. Mu Ichen suddenly stood up. He ruffled his hair in frustration and furrowed his brows. "Is it because you can't open it?" Mu Ichen shook his head. He was afraid that she would be nervous and worried, so he quickly comforted her. "It's just that I don't have the right tools. I'm still missing something." "What do you lack?" Mu Ichen turned around and looked at the corpses lying in a pool of blood. He wanted to give it a try, so he searched them one by one. However, other than pistols and magazines, he didn't find anything useful. Until he found a box of chewing gum on the last person's body. He opened it and sniffed it. After confirming that there was nothing wrong, he popped one into his mouth and chewed until it was as soft as mud. Then, he returned to the cage, spat out the gum, and slowly stuffed it into the lock. Yun Shusha was dumbfounded. She didn't know what kind of technique he was using, but she didn't dare to make a sound for fear of disturbing his train of thought. It was Mu Ichen who came up with the idea of chewing gum. When he found the chewing gum, he immediately thought that the chewing gum could be used to pick locks. Just now, he had carefully studied the structure of the lock. It was a one-word lock, so he could use the chewing gum to give it a try. However, he wasn't confident. He had only seen others try this method of picking locks, but he had never tried it himself. Chapter 33-34. After Mu Ichen inserted the chewing gum into the lock, he pressed it with his finger until it was firmly embedded. Then, he straightened the needle and inserted it in. He kept turning it, and in less than 3 seconds, there was a click and the lock popped open. Yun Shusha was stunned the whole time. Mu Ichen opened the lock and opened the cage door. He saw that Yun Shusha's wrists were still in handcuffs. Mu Ichen was very familiar with handcuffs, so it didn't take him much effort to unlock it. However, the moment the lock was unlocked, there was a beeping sound coming from Yoon Shusha's body. Beep beep, it sounded like the sound of some electronic device being activated. It sounded almost at the same time when the lock was unlocked. It was as if unlocking the lock had activated some kind of device. But this was just his guess. Chen couldn't help but feel that it was strange. Because this sound wasn't unfamiliar to him. When he was in the army, during actual combat training, he had seen the scene of bomb defusing. This was the sound of a time bomb. Oh no, could it be? Yoon Shusha was about to get up, but Chen pressed her back down and said in a deep voice, "Mommy, don't move." What's wrong? She couldn't help but feel nervous. Seeing Chen's vigilant face, her breathing quickened. Chen immediately smiled and comforted her. "Mommy, don't be nervous. From now on, you'll be in my care, okay?" "Okay." Chen held his breath and listened attentively. Following the source of the sound, he suddenly lifted Yoon Shusha's belt. When the belt was undone, there was a time bomb placed on her waist. The reason why Yoon Shusha didn't know about the existence of this thing was that this time bomb was installed when she was unconscious. A linkage device. Chen looked at the time bomb's fuse that was connected to the handcuffs. When the handcuffs were unlocked, the bomb would automatically activate and start the countdown. This was an extremely complicated linkage device. The time kept counting down. On the small rectangular screen, the numbers kept jumping. The countdown of 300 seconds was just a short 5 minutes. Yoon Shusha naturally didn't know what a linkage device was, but when she saw the rows of explosive tubes on her waist, she immediately realized what this thing was. Her face turned pale. Bomb! Yeah. She was frightened out of her wits at once. She had seen time bombs in movies a few times. Although the design was different, the difference was that the ones in the movies were all fake. In real life, once a bomb exploded, it would not have eyes at all. If an ordinary person saw this thing, it would undoubtedly be like seeing the Grim Reaper. They would definitely be scared witless. She immediately pushed him away and said, "Hurry up and leave, don't bother about me." He ys Huns *****. "Mommy, I'm Mommy's mommy, I'm Mommy, Mommy, I'm Mommy. Don't chase me away. Once the bomb explodes, you'll die. Mommy, listen." Chen took a deep breath and said, "I've learned some knowledge about defusing bombs." Although he was comforting her, the reality was that there was no such thing as a bomb disposal expert in the army. Most of the time, they used robots to defuse the bombs. Chapter 33-35. After all, compared to robots, human lives were more important. It was better not to use humans. The loss of a robot was small, but if a human died, it would be hard to explain. The structure of a bomb was indeed simple, but sometimes, the simpler it was, the more difficult it was to solve it. Such a thing could take a human life, so it was even more difficult to test one's luck. Chen said in a low voice, "Mommy, this is a time bomb. In other words, its device is designed to be able to explode. Some bombs were made in time by pulling the fuse and detonating it immediately. The design of a time bomb could prevent it from exploding. This meant that there was a chance of survival. Even if it was very slim, there was still a chance. There were only 4 minutes left. Chen swallowed hard and slowly removed the shell of the time bomb. His hands were very fast, but it still took him 20 seconds. After removing it, what was exposed to the air was the intricate wiring inside the bomb. There were many types of time bombs. According to his understanding, there were 3 types of bombs: ********, electric detonation, and black gunpowder. ******** bombs generally only needed to be removed directly. Without *******, the bomb was useless. Even a pistol could not break it. No matter what, it would not explode. Black gunpowder was a child's play. Other than that, ****** was used by the military and was more common. For someone like Dietrich, it was impossible for him to get his hands on such a thing. ****** bombs were very fierce and had an extremely bad temper. The slightest vibration would cause it to explode. In other words, as long as one stood up, the bomb would explode. The other bombs were octogenium, *****, Tyon, and C4. These were all extremely high-end bombs. They were rarely seen on the market. Even many terrorists could not get their hands on such things. Under normal circumstances, they would only appear in extreme situations. Moreover, the structure was extremely complicated. If one encountered these, it would be very difficult to remove them. However, after some research, Mu Chen found out that this bomb was an electric detonator. Usually, such bombs needed to be wired. Of course, it was not like those commonly seen on TV where one could choose between a red and a blue wire. Instead, it needed to be cut off to activate the battery and power circuit. Most of the detonation current was direct current. In this way, once the power source was destroyed, the bomb would lose its function. Without electricity, it wouldn't explode. However, it sounded very simple, but the wiring of such a device was very complicated. It was very difficult to distinguish between the power cord, the detonator cord, and the detonator cord. Mu Chen counted and found that there were about 10 wires. These wires were densely packed and orderly, but they were all of the same color. If he made a mistake, he would really be finished. Even if it was cut correctly, there was a certain probability of triggering a capacitive reverse detonation, which was impossible to guard against. The situation suddenly became a little tricky. Mu Chen fiddled with the threads, cold sweat seeping out of his forehead and trickling down his cheeks. Yun Shusha looked at his nervous face and realized that this bomb seemed to be very tricky. If it was not handled properly, it would be fatal. Chapter 33-36. Mu Chen curled his lips calmly. He lowered his head and looked at the wires. He said calmly, "There are still 3 minutes before the explosion. Even if I can't save you, I can still stay with you for 3 minutes." He suddenly looked up. His eyes were red, but he said slowly, "Mommy, I promised Daddy that I would bring you home safe and sound. I can't go back on my word." He couldn't go back on his word. Daddy was still waiting for them to come home. He couldn't leave Mommy behind. Yun Shusha suddenly choked up. "But, you can't force yourself, okay? If there's really no hope, you must run. There's no need to stay and risk your life." Xiao Chen suddenly smiled. He looked up at her and asked gently, "Mommy must be worried that you'll implicate me, right?" Yun Shusha's lips trembled. "Sometimes, I have to say that Mommy is really weak. You're just like a tree branch that can be broken by the wind. Take this time, for example. Mommy, you're really stupid. Do you really believe anyone's words so easily? No matter how close you are to them, they will betray you one day. But Mommy seems to be really innocent. You believe anyone's words so easily." After a pause, Xiao Chen changed the topic. "So God must have sent Daddy to your side because he couldn't stand it anymore. He gave birth to me and Yo-Yo, 2 powerful guardians. I think that protecting Mommy must be Yo-Yo's and my life's mission. No matter what, we can give up everything, but Mommy can't leave us alone." Yun Shusha was stunned. She was extremely touched. Xiao Chen smiled with tears in his eyes. "You're very kind. Even though some people in this world don't like this kind of kindness, because humans are born selfish. This kind of selfishness is the root of human nature. But being selfish isn't wrong because you only have one life. Everyone wants to live well and protect themselves. But being kind isn't wrong." Yun Shusha bit her lip hard, but Xiao Chen continued, "Mommy, did you know? Before I met you, I felt that the world was cold. When she was in the Mu family, she had to be careful at every step. Everyone was scheming in the dark for their own benefit. But ever since I met you, every day with you, I feel like the sun is shining brightly. Because Mommy was really gentle. It makes me feel warm." As he spoke, he took a deep breath and wiped away his tears. "So, I can't lose you. This is my bottom line." As he spoke, he lowered his head again and focused on identifying the direction of the line. Yun Shusha smiled and planted a kiss on his forehead. Her heart calmed down and she no longer felt so fearful. The direction of each line was extremely complicated. It wasn't because the lines were intricate, but because Xiao Chen had to use a lot of brain power just to mark the lines clearly. After marking the lines clearly, he had to check the direction of the lines and study the function of each line. Before they knew it, 3 minutes had passed. Xiao Chen had already eliminated 5 lines. 3 of them were lead lines and the other 2 were timer lines. Chapter 33-37. However, in reality, such wires were only used to stop the timer and detonate in time. Once they were cut, the countdown would stop and they would detonate 5 seconds later. It was easy to confuse such wires with power cables. However, Mu Chen had some experience. The more important the wires were, the shorter and longer they were, the more dangerous they were. 120, 119, 118, the seconds continued to count down. Mu Chen's face was already covered in cold sweat. Sweat flowed into his eyes and blurred his vision. Yun Shusha immediately wiped it away for him. The more he studied it, the more he hated that cunning Dytris to the core. Damn it! How on earth did they design such a complicated circuit? Mu Chen ignored the cold sweat all over his body and tried to remain calm. He continued to arrange the wires. After all the wires were classified, the alarm went off. There was only a 20-second countdown left. He sucked in a breath of cold air and casually pulled out a dagger from his waist. Flicking it open, he listed out 2 of the wires. The blade of the dagger pressed against the 2 wires. A cold light reflected on his face, dazzling his eyes. Mu Chen's throat was blocked, and his hands involuntarily trembled. Mommy, Mu Chen suddenly raised his head and held her hands tightly. He planted a kiss on the back of her hands and revealed a bright smile. No matter what, we'll be together forever. I won't leave you. Yun Shusha was choked with sobs. She could only nod her head randomly as tears flowed from the corners of her eyes. Although she believed in her son's ability, fate was unpredictable. Other than fear and uneasiness, she felt more heartache. How could this little guy bear so much for her? Yun Shusha hugged him and said word by word, I believe in you, Chen. Don't worry. Do as you wish. Okay. Mu Chen pinched the 2 wires. Only one of them was a power cable. He wasn't sure if the other was a condom lead or some other wire. However, he couldn't find any other condom lead. These 2 lines were the only 2 life-saving lines that he could use to save his life. However, he didn't dare to cut off the power cord that had already been confirmed. If he cut it off, the device would have a capacitive reverse detonation. Then, cutting off the power cord would also trigger the bomb. In that case, he could only pin his hopes on another path. Although he was not that confident, it was worth the risk. Mu Chen gritted his teeth and pinched one of the threads. He closed his eyes and took a few deep breaths. In the last few seconds, he cut off the thread. The timer on the time bomb let out a prolonged sound. It was so sharp that it was somewhat ear-piercing. The number stopped at 003 seconds and didn't move anymore. Mu Chen was so shocked that his eyes widened. Only when he confirmed that the timer had stopped did he realize that he had cut off the fuse. However, he did not relax immediately. Just in case, he immediately cut off the power cord, and the timer immediately went off. Yun Shusha was so nervous that she held her breath. Even when she saw the timer go off, the sweat on her face continued to roll down. Mu Chen finally slumped to the ground. The series of stressful events just now, especially at the critical moment, had almost exhausted all his mental strength. Now that he had relaxed, he was exhausted and weak all over. Chapter 33-38. He felt exhausted, as though he had just finished a huge battle. His mind was blank. Seeing him like this, Yun Shusha roughly understood the situation and knew that they were out of danger. However, she still did not dare to move, for fear that the slightest carelessness would lead to another crisis. Mu Chen slowly sat up, wiped the cold sweat on his forehead, and smiled with lingering fear. He suddenly pounced on Yun Shusha and snuggled into her arms. He hugged her so tightly that it was as though he had found a lost treasure. Yun Shusha also hugged him tightly. She had held back her tears during the nervous process earlier, but now, she suddenly felt like crying. Chen, thank you. At the most critical moment, he did not give up. Mu Chen cried and laughed at the same time. Even though he had amazing courage, he was still scared out of his wits just now. The reason why his hands were trembling so much was because he was really prepared to detonate the bomb. He did not expect that the heavens would favor him. This was his luck. Chen could not be bothered to be affectionate with her. He immediately removed the bomb from her waist and threw it out of the skylight. Shusha stood up and asked in confusion, "Where are we going now?" Chen said, "Mommy, from now on, follow me. Do whatever I ask you to do." "Okay." But, Shusha said hesitantly, "This is a cruise ship. It's no different from a prison on the sea. How are you going to take me out of here?" Chen smiled. "So, I'm going to the cockpit right away." After a pause, he asked again, "Mommy, are you scared?" "No. With you around, I'm not afraid of anything." Shusha shook her head firmly. Chen smiled. "That's good. Follow me." Shusha immediately lifted the hem of her dress and followed him. However, just as she stepped out of the cage, she was tripped. She looked back and realized that her long dress was caught by a metal wire. What a nuisance. Shusha gritted her teeth. She couldn't care less about her image. She tore off a large part of her skirt, revealing a pair of long, smooth legs. Chen held her hand and opened the door, but he didn't rush out. He knelt on the deck and pressed his ear to the deck, using the sound transmission method to determine the people nearby. Through the deck, he made a preliminary judgment that there were people in the vicinity. He immediately pulled Shusha to the right. On the way here, he had already drawn a rough map in his mind. Therefore, he had a rough idea of the direction to the cockpit. Cruise ships were more or less the same. Most of the cockpits were on the second or third floor, while they were on the first basement floor. Chen first settled Shusha in a corner, then he went forward to open up a path. Just now, he took away the guns and ammunition from the few pitiful crew members and silenced them. He loaded the pistol and carried it on his back at the entrance of the corridor. Then, he heard someone coming downstairs. From the sound of the footsteps, he could roughly tell that there were two people. He held his breath and focused. Suddenly, he thought of something and immediately put the gun back into the gun case at his waist. When the person came closer, he suddenly dodged. His movements were agile and fast, like a ghost. Chapter 33-39. The other man had just taken out his gun, but before he could load it, Chen grabbed his wrist and viciously struck his elbow joint with his other hand. In an instant, the man's arm was bent at a strange angle. Ah! Just as he was about to scream, Chen clasped his jaw and twisted it hard, dislocating his jaw. That person looked at him in horror, as if he was looking at a scary monster. Chen did not give him any chance to struggle. He grabbed his throat tightly and squeezed it hard, causing his throat joint to crack. He dragged the two corpses to one side and hid them in a corner. After cleaning up the scene, he returned to Shusha's side. "Mommy, let's go." The reason why he did not intend to use a gun was because using a gun would cause the scene to be covered in blood. Mommy would be scared if she saw it, but this was secondary. The main reason was that if he dirted the scene, it would be too eye-catching and it would be easy to be discovered. Compared to the tall and strong crew members, he was too skinny and small. But this was a disadvantage, but it was also an advantage. Although if they really fought, no matter how strong he was, it would be difficult for him to fight against a large number of people. But it was because he was so skinny that he was able to be as agile as a wolf. He carefully carried on his back. Along the way, after dealing with a few crew members, he brought Shusha to the cockpit. In the cockpit, the co-pilot was sitting on the chair. At this moment, a nimble figure flashed past the door and opened the door of the cockpit, quietly sneaking behind him. Before the captain could react to who it was, he was punched in the head. Chen picked up the man's tottering body and twirled the dagger in his hand nimbly. The pitiful man only felt a chill in his throat as hot blood spurted onto the passenger seat. The stench of blood assailed his nostrils. He spared the captain's life. The little fellow quickly used the same method to escape into the engine room, leaving a crooked corpse behind as he returned to the cockpit. The captain was scared half to death. He curled up in a corner, trembling. Chen took out his gun and aimed it at his temple. He coldly said in broken English, "Do you want to live? I'm begging you. Don't kill me." The captain begged humbly. Chen pressed the gun a little harder. "If you're obedient, I won't kill you." Yes. I promise I'll be obedient." Mu Chen took out a pair of handcuffs and cuffed his left hand to a fixed position. He ordered, "Deactivate the alarm." Most cruise ships had radar warning devices. Once other ships or units approached, the warning device would be activated. The only reason he spared the captain's life was because he didn't like killing people. The captain looked weak and powerless and didn't seem to be a threat to him. More importantly, he didn't know how to operate a cruise ship. If the cruise ship lost its helmsman and lost control, the consequences would be unimaginable. To be safe, he did this. The captain nodded in a daze. He couldn't help but hesitate. Mu Chen stabbed the dagger in his hand into his thigh. "Ah!" The captain gritted his teeth and cried out in pain. Mu Chen grabbed him by the collar and warned him coldly, "Do as I say." "Yes, yes." The captain was in so much pain that he couldn't breathe properly. He immediately pulled down a lever. There was a ding-ding-ding sound and the screen showed TALLCLEAL. The alarm had been deactivated. Chapter 3340. Continue sailing as usual. Yes. Understood. Mu Chen pulled Yun Shusha into the cockpit and locked the door. "Mommy, this is the safest place for now." Yun Shusha nodded in a daze. Mu Chen had already cleaned up the corpses in the cockpit. She suddenly felt uneasy when she saw the little guy covered in blood. She didn't want to see Mu Chen kill anyone, but she knew that if Mu Chen didn't get rid of all these people, they would be the ones getting rid of. Wasn't it always the law of the jungle in this world? Mu Chen didn't know what she was thinking about. He took out the necklace around his neck and opened it gently. He pressed a hidden button and the location information was immediately sent to Mu Yaja's handheld terminal. At the port, the sea breeze blew against their faces. Gong Jie's armed ship was already ready to set off. 2 hours ago, he had rushed over. He happened to pass by the nearby waters, so he was still in time. Other than the armed ship, he also brought along more than 10 armed helicopters and 2 nuclear submarines. Of course, he had also prepared $3 billion USD. Alas, while Gong Jie was prepared to get the $3 billion US, Dytris would have to be alive to get it. Mu Yaja's handheld terminal vibrated. He opened the interface and saw that Mu Chen had sent a location signal. He was excited and looked up at Gong Jie. "We can set off now." Gong Jie had been waiting for a long time. When he heard this, his handsome face showed a trace of surprise. "You've received the signal?" "Yes." Before the 2 little guys set off, Yo-Yo and Mu Chen both wore a necklace. This necklace was a signal receiver and could also send location information. It was also at this time that Mu Chen realized that Yo-Yo had invented such a terrifying technology. A dagger disguised as a belt, a signal transmitter hidden in the necklace, and a smart nanochip implanted under the skin. These were concepts that he had only seen in science fiction magazines, but Yo-Yo had already put them to use. "Let's go." Mu Yaja sent the location information to the cargo ship's navigation system and followed the route to the destination. Compared to Dytris's cruise ship, Gong Jie's armed ship could be said to be an extremely crazy existence. Its speed was top-notch and it was fully armed. When Mu Yaja first boarded the ship, he was shocked. The so-called ship was only from Gong Jie's mouth. A certain man always liked to use understated words to describe things that were too heaven-defying. Although it was called ship, in fact, it was actually a second-generation aircraft carrier developed by the former Soviet Union. An aircraft carrier. Even Mu Yaja was surprised. One had to know that even though the military was very advanced, not every country had an aircraft carrier. Even a superpower like the United States of America only had 10 Nimitz-class nuclear-powered aircraft carriers in service. The other 2 were super nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, and 12 aircraft carriers were patrolling the sea. They were the world's undisputed super maritime overlords. Many countries did not have an aircraft carrier in service. All of them dreamed of having an aircraft carrier that they had developed on their own. Having an aircraft carrier meant having a strong military force. Chapter 3341. Having an aircraft carrier meant that the military forces were powerful. However, such an aircraft carrier that was not inferior to a super nuclear-powered one was just a toy ship to Gong Jie. This was also the reason why Hurricane Group was so fearful. If Hurricane were to use all of its strength, then its armed forces would be comparable to any of the 5 Joint Union member nations. Although it was about a few hundred kilometers away from the target, it was not worth mentioning to Gong Jie. If he sped up, he would be able to reach the target in about an hour. After all, his aircraft carrier was a super nuclear-powered one. Compared to nuclear-powered, the power of Dietrich's broken ship was nothing. After Mu Chen sent the location, he stood up and glanced at the captain. Then, he said to Yun Shusha, "Mommy, can you do me a favor?" Now, I'm going to look for Yo-Yo. You stay here and keep an eye on him. Don't let him do anything." Yun Shusha was shocked when she heard this. "Yo-Yo is also on this ship?" "Yes." Xiao Ichen nodded. "I came with him. But I'm worried that he's in danger, so I'm going to save him now." Yun Shusha nodded quickly. "Yes, go quickly." Mu Chen immediately passed the dagger and pistol to her and reminded her, "You must protect yourself. If he dares to play any tricks, let him have a taste of his own medicine." "Okay. Mommy should know how to use a gun, right?" Yun Shusha nodded. "Yes, I learned it on the set." "Okay, Mommy, I believe in you." After Mu Chen finished speaking, he left immediately. There was a long distance between the cockpit and the VIP cabin. It was equivalent to going from the bow to the stern of the ship. When he left, he deliberately locked the door of the cockpit. The windows of the cockpit were made of bulletproof glass. This way, they could prevent outsiders from entering. After all, he didn't feel at ease leaving his mommy alone there. But compared to mommy, he was more worried about Yo-Yo. After all, Dietrich was a cunning old fox. His methods were sinister and ruthless. He didn't know what methods he would use to deal with Yo-Yo. Sneaking all the way to the first floor, Mu Chen walked out of the corridor and was caught off guard when he bumped into 3 patrolling sailors. Mu Chen was shocked and immediately ran back. The 3 sailors saw it, but before they could see it clearly, they felt a shadow flash before their eyes. They looked at each other, vigilantly pulled out their pistols, loaded them, and walked to the entrance of the corridor with their backs against the wall. They turned around and looked, but there was no one. "Where is he?" Just as the 3 of them were confused, Mu Chen appeared above their heads. His hands gripped the door frame of the cabin roof, and his legs kicked out cleanly. His straightened feet hit the faces of the 2 people at the front. The 2 fell to the ground. The other one nervously raised his wrist and was about to shoot, but Mu Chen didn't give him a chance to aim. His legs clamped the man's neck, and with a flip, he threw him to the ground. He snatched the gun from the man's hand and shot at close range with a bang. The man who was about to sneak up on him from behind had a headshot. The power of a bullet was not to be underestimated, especially when shooting at close range. As long as one aimed at the head, there was a 100% chance of a headshot. Chapter 3342. Fresh blood splattered all over his body. He immediately jumped up and loaded his gun. Bang! Bang! He fired at the other 2 men. One of them, who had been shot in the chest, was still struggling. Mu Chen walked over, raised his leg, and stepped on his neck. His right hand gripped the man's jaw and twisted his throat. He threw the 3 men into the sea and quickly cleaned up the floor. When he passed by the banquet hall, he noticed that it was brightly lit. He looked in through the window and saw many well-dressed people gathered. "What's going on?" Mu Chen looked out of the window suspiciously. The guests were gathered in the hall, but the strange thing was that everyone was wearing half a mask that covered their eyes. It was extremely strange at first glance. Everyone surrounded the stage and was in high spirits. In the hall, the music was melodious and the guests were chatting and laughing. It looked like a simple banquet. However, Mu Chen still found something strange. An MC was standing on the stage. Behind him, a red curtain slowly rose. Next, we will be showing the 3rd piece of art. It's called Pearl of the Sea. The starting price is 500,000 USD. As the red curtain rose, a rectangular iron cage slowly appeared. The red curtain rose very slowly. The music suddenly stopped. Therefore, the strange sound from behind the red curtain could be heard more clearly. It was the sound of a person struggling. It was the sound of metal hitting metal. Mu Chen widened his eyes in shock. It was not because of the seemingly strange auction, but because of the woman whose hands and feet were tied up in the cage. The woman's 4 limbs were tied up. Her face was also covered with a mask. Her mouth was also tightly covered with black tape. She had obviously regained consciousness and realized that she was tightly tied up. She was afraid and uneasy, so she struggled fiercely. Although her face could not be seen clearly and her voice could not be heard, the mask only covered her eyes. It was not difficult to see the woman's delicate appearance through her delicate nose and lips. She had golden hair and fair skin. It was obvious that she was of European descent. I don't know if everyone has seen it, but this piece of art is quite exquisite. The starting price is $500,000. The highest bidder wins. When the woman heard the host's voice, she began to tremble nervously. Everyone held their breaths in shock. Whispers could be heard from time to time in the crowd. This is a stunner. 500,000. The starting price is not high. I want it. Someone immediately raised the number plate. $1 million. The host said, "All right, Mr. Number 10, $1 million once." Immediately, another lady raised her paddle. $2 million. The host's face was flushed red. Number 24 lady, $2 million once. $5 million. Everyone below the stage sucked in a breath of cold air. The sudden change was too great, and everyone became nervous. Mua Chen didn't know the identities of the people gathered here, but they were probably rich and respectable. The host shouted, "Number 50, $5 million going once. $5 million going twice. Are there no more bids?" The host shook his head. "What a pity. She's a rare beauty." He walked to the cage and unlocked it. Then, he slowly took off the mask on the woman's face. Chapter 33:43. Her delicate eyebrows were exposed in front of everyone. The woman was even more panicked. Her eyes were wide open, and her long eyelashes were trembling. She was terrified. She shook her head desperately, as if she was begging. Tears kept falling from the corners of her eyes, making her look miserable and pitiful. $10 million. Someone immediately raised their number and continued to bid. The MC was not in a hurry to call out but pretended to be mysterious. "I wonder if everyone has heard Nightingale's singing voice." As he spoke, he removed the black tape that sealed the woman's mouth. As soon as it was undone, the woman begged, "Please, no, oh my God." Many people revealed intoxicated expressions. "Her voice is sweet, just like Nightingale's. Haha. I like her sweet voice. $20 million. The auction was in full swing. Mua Chen felt incredulous. What was going on? Auctioning a living person? What a disregard for the law. Mua Chen looked at the woman who was exquisitely dressed and wearing a beautiful gown. He suddenly realized why he was also wearing a gorgeous gown when he saw his mother. Could it be? He finally realized his mother was also an auction item. He had heard from Yo-Yo that Dietrich was the leader of the dark web. He had a huge network that specialized in international transactions. However, in this global international trade, what was being traded was not ordinary goods, but living people. He suddenly felt a lingering fear. He did not know what would have happened to his mother if he and Yo-Yo had arrived a little later. Would she have been auctioned off like this woman? In the end, the woman was bought by a man in his 50s at the high price of $50 million. In the end, the woman was wrapped up and sent to an unknown place. The MC returned to the stage and the red curtain fell. He raised his wine glass and drank it in one gulp. Then, he said, "Next up is tonight's finale item, Yunshan Shiyi. Everyone, please wait and see." Yunshan Shiyi. Xiao Chen's heart skipped a beat. Just by hearing the name, he knew that the finale item was his mother. The host whispered to a woman beside him. The woman nodded and quickly left through the secret door. When Mua Chen saw this, he immediately knew that this woman had probably gone to the dungeon. However, Yun Shusha was no longer there. He didn't know which way the woman left. The secret passages on the cruise ship extended in all directions. He couldn't grasp her whereabouts. No, he had to save Yo-Yo as soon as possible. Otherwise, the consequences would be unimaginable. "Who's there?" Not far away, a man's scolding voice could be heard. Mu Chen turned around and looked at the man. He smiled and said, "I'm just passing by." Passing by? Xiao Ichen spoke in Chinese, so the men didn't understand what he was saying. However, it wasn't until Xiao Ichen jumped down from the box by the window and exposed himself to the moonlight that the men saw that he was covered in blood and had a sinister smile on his face. "You." Before the men could react, Xiao Ichen pulled out the dagger from his waist belt and a cold gleam flashed across. A few seconds later, the corpses fell to the ground. Before they could even close their eyes, they breathed their last. Chapter 33-44. In the cockpit, Yun Shusha was drenched in cold sweat. Her palm, which was tightly gripping the pistol, was covered in sticky cold sweat. She stared intently at the captain's every move, full of vigilance. The captain pretended to be calm as he steered the rudder. However, he kept looking at her from the corner of his eye. He reached out tentatively and pressed a few buttons. The lights on the control panel immediately lit up. Yun Shusha didn't control the rudder, but she remembered that there was a push rod that had an alarm. Xiao Ichen said that as long as he didn't push the push rod, everything would be fine. Hence, Yun Shusha was vigilant of his every move. However, what she didn't know was that there was more than one way to push the push rod. If he pressed another button, the push rod would automatically push down. She heard a creaking sound. She didn't know what button he had pressed, but the push rod slowly slid down. Suddenly, the alarm sounded in the cockpit. Yun Shusha heard the alarm outside the cockpit and looked at the push rod. It had been pulled. Mu Chen was halfway there when he heard the alarm and frowned. Yun Shusha was flustered and exasperated. She questioned him, "What did you do?" However, the captain continued to steer the rudder as if nothing had happened. She gritted her teeth and tried to push the push rod. However, the push rod was locked in place and couldn't move at all. No matter how hard she tried, the push rod wouldn't budge. Yun Shusha raised the gun and pointed it between his eyebrows. She ordered, "I'm ordering you to remove the alarm." However, the captain was unmoved. He still looked calm and composed as if he was sure that she wouldn't dare to shoot. She didn't know how to steer the rudder. He was the only captain on the cruise ship. If the ship wanted to move, it could only rely on him. If he died, everyone on the ship would be done for. Yun Shusha saw that he didn't seem to be threatened by her. She sneered, "Do you think I won't dare to shoot?" She loaded the gun and pulled the trigger. The captain glanced at her from the corner of his eye and waved his hand abruptly, causing her gun to fall to the ground. She was caught off guard and fell to the ground with a kick. She felt a sharp pain in her chest, and the pistol slipped not far away. She immediately got up and wanted to pick it up. The captain stepped hard on the back of her hand. Yun Shusha cried out in pain and her face turned red. One of his hands was handcuffed, but the other hand was free. He immediately reached out to grab the pistol. Based on the current situation, if he were to obtain the gun, then the situation would be one-sided. She would definitely die in the hands of this man. No. How could Yun Shusha let him have his way? Mu Chen had given this place to her, which meant that he trusted her. How could she let him down? Yun Shusha didn't know where the strength came from, but she suddenly hugged the captain's leg and bit down viciously. She used almost all of her strength. The captain was in so much pain that he instinctively kicked her and she fell to the ground. Because of this kick, Yun Shusha's shoulder was slightly dislocated. However, she ignored the pain and sat up with a face full of cold sweat. She pounced on the pistol and grabbed it in her hand. She got it. She was pleasantly surprised. She immediately rolled to the side and put the pistol away. She stood up and held the dagger in her hand. She raised her hand viciously and stabbed the captain's thigh. She used almost all of her strength. Chapter 33-45. The captain was in so much pain that he let out a heart-wrenching cry. Yun Shusha wiped away the blood that had splattered on her face. She stood up and pressed the dagger firmly against his neck. She said word by word in English, "I'm warning you, don't play any trick. Deactivate the alarm." The captain was in so much pain that his eyes were about to burst. His eyes were red as he shouted at Yun Shusha, "Kill me if you can. You're really not afraid of death." Yun Shusha gritted her teeth and pressed the dagger a little tighter. The sharp dagger quickly cut through a layer of his skin and blood gushed out. The captain was stunned. Now, he could no longer feel the pain on his neck. However, the sticky blood that flowed into his collar made him realize that she really dared to do it. He gritted his teeth and stood there for a long time until Shusha raised the dagger in her hand again. He immediately clenched his teeth and pressed a button to reset the plunger to its original position. The alarm was deactivated immediately. Xiao Chen stood there for a long time. Originally, he was worried about Shusha and wanted to go back to the cockpit to check on the situation. However, since the alarm was deactivated, it meant that his mommy was safe and sound. This was her signal to him that she was safe. Chen didn't dare to hesitate anymore and rushed to the VIP cabin. Hearing the alarm, Dietrich stood up abruptly and walked to the door. He opened it and looked around. He grabbed a sailor guarding the door and questioned, "What's going on?" I don't know. Go check on the situation." Dietrich returned to the VIP cabin and thought about it. He felt that something was wrong. Yo-Yo sat on the sofa with his hands cuffed to the armrests. He couldn't move. When he heard the alarm, he also felt that something was strange and was a little confused. What was going on? Did something happen to his mommy and Xiao Chen? He was a little worried. While he was lost in thought, Dietrich walked up to him and grabbed him by the collar. He questioned, "You dare to play tricks with me? I'll take your life." "Dietrich, are you joking?" Facing him, Yu was not flustered. Instead, he coldly retorted, "We have 2 children and my mother. What tricks do we have to play? I've been thinking about something. You 2 kids actually dared to board my ship. That in itself is inconceivable. I don't have any weapons on me. How can I pose any threat to you?" After pausing for a moment, Yo-Yo said calmly, "Dietrich, I didn't expect you to be so cowardly." Yo-Yo's unconscious provocation completely angered Dietrich. He raised his hand and punched him hard. Yo-Yo's palm-sized face was slapped to the side. Just as he was about to hit him, the panicked voice of his men came from the door. "Boss. Oh no, he's gone." Dietrich suddenly came back to his senses and glared at him. "What do you mean? The finale of the auction is missing." Dietrich was furious. "Gone? How could he be missing? We sent people to the dungeon, but they only saw a few corpses. The person you wanted is no longer there. Impossible." Dietrich shouted in anger. "How could this be?" He sent a few strong men to guard one person. There were 2 locks, one of which was a linkage. Once the handcuffs on Shusha's hands were opened, it would activate the bomb. Chapter 3346. How did she disappear for no reason? The lock on the cage was pried open. Inside the cage, we found handcuffs and a dismantled bomb. Bomb? Yo-Yo turned pale with fright when he heard this. How could Dietrich be so ruthless as to tie a bomb to Mommy? However, when he heard that the bomb had been dismantled, he was relieved that Xiao Chen must have dismantled the bomb. Dietrich walked in front of his subordinate in disbelief. His face was red with anger. "What did you say? Don't tell me that an 8-year-old child dismantled a bomb with his bare hand." He paused as he thought of the alarm. He reacted quickly and shouted, "Go check the cockpit." Yes. Yes, the man was so frightened that he scrambled away. Dietrich returned to the room and walked over. He grabbed Yo-Yo and threw him to the ground. Then, he stepped on his chest and stomped on it. "Brat. I knew that you wouldn't be simple if you dared to trespass on my cruise ship. I've underestimated you. I didn't expect you to be so capable." Yo-Yo's chest was being stomped on so hard that he couldn't breathe. His face was red and his forehead was sweating profusely. He gritted his teeth and his eyes were bloodshot. It was difficult to distinguish between red and green on his fair face. Dietrich seemed to feel that it was not enough to vent his anger, and he threw another punch. An adult's strength was not something an average child could handle. Yo-Yo was weak and couldn't take the second punch. Hence, he was already in a daze after the second punch. His gaze wandered and a sticky liquid flowed from his nose. He raised his hand and wiped it away forcefully. However, he sneered, "Dietrich, you've lost." Dietrich glared at him. "Shut up. You pitiful little bug, How can you be so arrogant when you're about to die? Do you believe that I can crush you to death? Behind him, the cabin door was kicked open. Dieteris turned around in shock. Before he could see who made the sound, he heard a loud bang. The two subordinates that Dieteris had ordered to check the situation in the cockpit were kicked in by Xiao Chen. Dieteris took a closer look and saw that the two of them were no longer breathing. They lay limp on the ground, completely dead. Yo-Yo. When Xiao Chen saw Yo-Yo lying on the ground and her clothes covered in blood, his eyes turned red. He pulled out his gun and was about to load it when Dieteris immediately dodged. Bang! Bang! 2 gunshots rang out. One shot, aimed at Dieteris's calf, went through the muscle. The other bullet was aimed at the handcuffs on Yo-Yo's head. The bullet accurately broke the handcuffs and Yo-Yo immediately regained her freedom. Their pistols had already run out of ammunition. Xiao Chen threw the gun aside and rushed over. He carried Yo-Yo and checked his injuries. How are you? Yo-Yo smiled weakly and only cared about comforting him. I'm fine. Fine? How could he be fine? He lost so much blood. Xiao Chen's hands trembled with heartache. He hugged Yo-Yo's shoulders in frustration and said in a choked voice, I'm sorry, I'm late. Behind them came the sound of stumbling footsteps. Chapter 33:47. Xiao Chen looked back and saw that Dietrich had been shot in the leg. Dietrich had pounced behind him with a machete in his hand and was about to slash it at Xiao Chen. Be careful. Yu did not know where he got his strength from, but he pushed him away harshly. Seeing that the machete was about to cleave little Chen's neck, he subconsciously reached out to block it. A crisp sound was heard. The amethyst necklace on Yo-Yo's wrist happened to block the sharp blade. However, the necklace broke and the amethyst crystals fell to the ground. Necklace. Yo-Yo's eyes were filled with panic. Even when he was tortured by Dietrich just now, he did not show any signs of nervousness. When he saw the necklace break, he instantly felt helpless and panicked. He reached out to catch the broken crystals. The amethyst crystals fell to the ground. This was given to him by Xiao Chen. They each had a necklace, but he had broken it. At that moment, his mind was filled with the necklace and he did not care about anything else. Xiao Chen saw that the necklace was broken and his eyes were filled with hatred. He quickly got up and snatched the machete from Dietrich's hand. He slashed Dietrich's thigh and accurately severed the meridians in his thigh. Dietrich clenched his teeth and groaned in pain. He immediately stood up again. Mu Chen got up and kicked him in the chest. With a thud, he staggered and knelt on the ground. Dietrich! Yelled little Chen through gritted teeth. Grabbing his brother's collar, he raised his fist and was about to give him a painful punch when he heard the man's words. However, Dietrich suddenly stretched out his hands and clenched them into fists. Between his fingers were 2 thin and long steel needles. They were thick and long, and they were aimed at Xiao Chen's abdomen. Mu Chen quickly grabbed both of Dietrich's hands, but it was too late. One of the steel needles pierced his abdomen. Mu Chen's body swayed slightly. Because of this stab, he subconsciously curled up his body in pain. Dietrich seized the opportunity and viciously punched Xiao Chen's body. Like a thin sheet of paper, Xiao Chen's body flew several meters away and fell to the ground. Dietrich slowly stood up and walked towards him. Xiao Chen straightened his body with great difficulty. He covered his bleeding abdomen and stared at him with a burning gaze. He watched as he picked up the scimitar from the ground and charged towards him. Die! Dieteris roared, but just as he raised his hand, Yo-Yo raised the vase in her hand and smashed it at the back of his head. Bang! The vase shattered. Dietrich shuddered violently. His grip loosened, and the machete fell to the ground. Mu Chen immediately stretched out his leg, hooked it over, and held it tightly in his hand. The next moment, the man fell to the ground weakly and fainted. Yo-Yo stood up and walked in front of Xiao Chen. She stretched her hand out to him. Looks like Big Brother isn't omnipotent. You can't do it without me. Mu Chen smiled at him and said, Yeah, I can't do without you, Yo-Yo. He extended his hand and the 2 little lads held each other's hands tightly. Chapter 33:48. How is it? Is it serious? Mu Chen shook his head and comforted him, It's okay. It's just a small injury. Yo-Yo was still nervous. Xiao Chen said helplessly, Yo-Yo, I've suffered worse injuries before. It's okay. Don't worry, okay? Okay. Yo-Yo nodded, but he looked guilty. Xiao Chen wiped his hands on his trousers until the blood on his hands was clean. He then reached out and patted his head gently. Then he stood up, walked over to Dietrich, and took off his tie. Yo-Yo watched from the side. He tied Dietrich's hands behind his back, hooked his legs up, and tied his hands and feet behind his back with the tie. His tying technique was different from usual. It was the professional tying technique used by the police. He was tied up tightly and couldn't break free no matter how hard he tried. He took out a pair of handcuffs. His movements were a little too big and affected his wound, but he didn't make a sound. He handcuffed Dietrich to a pillar at the side. After making sure that everything was fine, he turned to Yo-Yo and said, Let's go find Mommy. Okay. Yo-Yo nodded and asked worriedly, Where's Mommy? In the cockpit. We have to hurry over to prevent any accident. Did you send a signal to Daddy? Yo-Yo suddenly asked anxiously. Xiao Chen didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Yo-Yo, do you think I'm stupid? When I rescued Mommy, I sent a location to Daddy's terminal. It's been more than half an hour. Daddy and Uncle should be here soon. Yo-Yo was completely relieved. The two little lads held hands and walked to the cockpit. Yun Shusha stayed in the cockpit. She stared at the captain with a burning gaze, but he looked exhausted. He forced himself to steer the ship, but blood kept flowing out of his wound. Yun Shusha couldn't help but worry if he had lost too much blood. Are you all right? Yun Shusha squinted her eyes and asked. While she was worried, she also suspected that he was playing some tricks again. Could it be that he was luring her to let her guard down and wanted to do something again? The captain's lips twitched violently. He suddenly staggered and fell onto the rudder. Yun Shusha was startled. She went forward vigilantly and pushed his shoulder. However, his body tilted and he fell into his seat. There was no movement. He's dead. Yun Shusha was frightened. She immediately reached out to hold the rudder, but she didn't know how to balance it. She didn't know how to control such a large cruise ship, so she immediately reached out to slap his face. Wake up. When she touched his face just now, it was ice cold. He seemed to have lost too much blood and fainted from shock. Once a person lost too much blood and did not stop the bleeding for a long time, they would go into shock due to excessive blood loss, leading to brain death. Were humans so fragile? She sighed in her heart. Yun Shusha was in disbelief. She held onto the rudder and looked at the dashboard nervously. However, she saw many lights blinking. She gritted her teeth and tried hard to recognize the signs. However, she couldn't understand some of the signs at all. She didn't know what they were for, so she didn't dare to touch them. Looking ahead, she couldn't tell if there was any danger in the seemingly calm sea. She also couldn't understand the radar map on the screen. Chapter 3349. Yun Shusha was flustered, but she could only stabilize the rudder. She did not dare to act rashly. Beside her, the captain fell to the ground and did not move anymore. Generally speaking, a captain was not enough to control a cruise ship. In the cockpit, the cruise ship was not operated by the captain. Most of the time, it was the sailors who steered the ship. Just now, there was a slight malfunction in the cockpit. The lookout had noticed something unusual ahead, so the captain, first mate, and third mate came over to inspect and command. Xiao Chen knew a little about maritime affairs. When he saw the captain in the cockpit, he knew that something special must have happened. Hence, the captain personally came to steer the ship. Therefore, he was spared to stay alive and control the cruise ship. The captain was fearless because he knew how important he was. Therefore, he was certain that Yun Shusha would not dare to attack him. Yun Shusha did not want to attack him at first, but she knew that if she did not do anything, she might be the one to die. However, the current crisis was that without a sailor at the helm, there were often many uncertainties. Under normal circumstances, without anyone steering the ship, the cruise ship would drift on its own without any accidents. However, this was under normal circumstances. However, the cruise ship had a fixed route at sea. Only by following the fixed route could they avoid many dangers. The sea was huge, so huge that it was unimaginable. 70% of the world was made up of the sea, and people's control of the sea was still very limited. There were many dangers at sea that were hard to predict. If they deviated from the route, it was a small matter. If they could not avoid the storm, the ship could capsize at any time. Now, she was the only one in the cockpit. Yoon Shusha was overcautious. Just now, she had seen how the captain steered the ship. The controls were complicated, and there were many things on the dashboard. She could not tell what was what. The layout of the cruise ship was different from that of a car. She could not understand it just by looking at it. At this moment, an alarm suddenly sounded from the screen. The red light kept flashing. Yoon Shusha walked over and looked at the screen. However, she saw a bunch of random codes on the screen. She was confused. She thought it was English, but after looking at it for a long time, she couldn't understand what the series of numbers on the screen meant. On the screen, there was only a vague route. After the red light flashed for a long time, Yoon Shusha didn't dare to touch it. Not long after, a red-framed exclamation mark jumped up in the upper right corner. What happened? Yoon Shusha was so anxious that she broke out in cold sweat. The alarm in the cockpit attracted the attention of the second mate who was in another cabin. He saw that the door was locked and became suspicious. He approached the door and looked inside. He was shocked. Inside the cockpit, several corpses were strewn all over the floor. Blood was everywhere. Yoon Shusha heard the commotion at the door and turned to look at it. She saw a sailor-like man blocking the door. Startled, she took a step back and subconsciously tightened her grip on the pistol in her hand. Her eyes remained vigilant as she stared at the door from start to finish. "Open the door." The man outside the door shouted for the door to be opened. Yoon Shusha was not stupid enough to open the door for her. "There's an anomaly ahead that has triggered the alarm. Let me in." Chapter 3350. She raised her gun and aimed it at him. When the sailor outside the door saw that she had a gun, he raised his hand instinctively and explained, I just came to check on the situation. I hope you know that if the ship is in danger, we will all die." "I know." Yoon Shusha gulped nervously. "I'll let you in, but don't threaten me. Otherwise, I'll definitely kill you." The sailor nodded in fear. Yoon Shusha aimed her gun at him as she reached out to open the door. However, she realized that the door was locked from the outside. When the second mate saw that the door was locked from the outside, he immediately reacted. He took out a bunch of keys from his pocket, found the key, and inserted it into the lock. From the beginning to the end, Yoon Shusha aimed her gun at him vigilantly. The moment the door opened, the sailor pounced on her. Yoon Shusha was caught off guard and fell to the ground. Just as she was about to shoot, the man punched the corner of her mouth. Bam! She was caught off guard. She arched her body in pain, but she hugged the gun tightly to prevent him from snatching it away. The sailor pulled out his knife from his waist and held the handle. Just as he raised his hand, suddenly, the ship suddenly let out an ear-piercing creak, and there was a strong turbulence. It was as if the entire ship was quaking and the mountains were shaking. Yoon Shusha was shocked. She only felt that the entire ship was still shaking as if the world was turning upside down. What's going on? Yoon Shusha's heart sank into great fear. The huge shaking caused the tip of the knife that the man was about to stab her chest to deviate and pierce the deck beside her. The tip of the knife stabbed into the deck ruthlessly. Coupled with the unstable center of gravity, it was difficult to pull it out. Yoon Shusha reacted and took this opportunity to kick him away. Just as she held the gun tightly, but before she could aim, there was an even louder shaking. Boom! Through the deck, she seemed to hear an ear-piercing tearing sound coming from the bottom of the ship. Her heart turned cold. The sailor couldn't care less about her. He quickly got up and rushed to the screen, shouting that something was wrong. Shit! He cursed and threw himself into the rescue. Yoon Shusha did not know what was going on. Just as she was confused, she heard an ear-piercing sound. The hull shook again. This time, the shaking was not as fierce as the previous 2 times. In an instant, the entire cockpit was plunged into darkness. The electrical system was damaged, and the entire cabin was plunged into darkness. Xiao Ichen and Yo-Yo were on their way here when they encountered such a strong turbulence. The cabin shook continuously, and Yo-Yo almost lost his balance. Xiao Ichen immediately reached out to support him. What's going on? Yo-Yo looked around nervously. Under the dreary moonlight, the waves crashed against the hull of the boat. Xiao Ichen walked to the railing and looked down. When he saw that the waves were abnormal, he frowned and said in shock, "I'm afraid we've hit a reef." Hit a reef? Yes. Is it serious? Yo-Yo didn't understand these things and asked him curiously. He suddenly realized that he didn't know everything. He also realized that sometimes, he needed to rely on Xiao Ichen. Xiao Ichen nodded solemnly and said worriedly, "From the looks of it, it must be very serious. A ship accidentally hitting a reef could be a serious matter." Chapter 3351. There were two types of rocks, soft rocks and hard rocks. When the former hit rocks, the seabed would be soft clay. When the latter hit rocks, they would hit sharp rocks with sharp edges. These rocks were usually as sharp as knives. When the ship hit the rocks, it would be like a knife cutting through the ship's hull. The waves were so rough, which meant that the rocks were very big. The ship was traveling at high speed, so it was very risky for it to hit rocks at such a fast speed. When Xiao Ichen saw that the ship had stopped, he knew that the bottom of the ship must have been cut. Once the ship's hull was cut open, the bottom of the ship would be torn apart by the rocks and water would enter the ship. If water entered the hull, it would cause the ship to capsize and sink to a certain extent. Xiao Ichen looked at Yo-Yo anxiously. "I'm not sure how serious the situation is, but I'm sure that the ship hit rocks and the water entering the hull affected the electrical system. This means that the bottom of the ship has been cut open. We have to find Mommy as soon as possible and then find a lifeboat to take Mommy away from this ship." "You mean this cruise ship could sink at any time?" "Not at any time. It can't sink immediately, but," Xiao Ichen said each word seriously and affectionately, "we don't have much time left." Yo-Yo also became nervous. She nodded and ran toward the cockpit. Along the way, the ship kept shaking. The originally brightly lit banquet hall suddenly fell into darkness. The band members also stood up curiously. The music stopped abruptly, and the sudden silence made everyone even more nervous. The unexpected circuit failure caused everyone to fall into a panic. "Help! Oh my God, what's going on? Did something happen?" In the banquet hall, the guests were screaming nervously, and the scene was in a mess. The screams were hoarse, and there was a hubbub of voices. Accompanied by the sound of tableware falling and shattering, many people scrambled to run towards the door. At the most desperate moment, the selfishness of human nature was exposed. Many people rushed forward, but because it was dark, they couldn't see anything clearly. The banquet hall was completely enclosed, so there was no light and they couldn't see their own fingers. People followed their instincts and ran to the door like a flock of frightened headless flies. In the crowd, some women accidentally tripped over the things under their feet and fell to the ground. They wondered if it was because of the shaking of the ship that they lost their balance and fell, but no one was willing to help them. Instead, they stepped over them and ran to the door. At this critical juncture, their lives were on the line. If they could not even care about their own safety, who would care about the lives of others? Many weak women were trampled to death just like that. People broke through the banquet hall's door and rushed to the deck. The crowd surged onto the deck like a rising tide. Xiao Ichen and Yo-Yo happened to pass by the banquet hall. When they saw people running towards the deck, they immediately hugged Yo-Yo. "Be careful." Yo-Yo was pulled into his arms. Then, they saw the black mass of people running out of the banquet hall. At this moment, the ship shook again and started to tilt slightly. The people who were running towards the deck suddenly lost their center of gravity and stumbled in the direction of the tilt. There was nothing to hold on to. Chapter 3352. Some of them were lucky. Even though they were nervous, they managed to grab onto the railing in time. Some of them panicked and didn't know how to react. They crashed into the railing and fell into the sea. "Ah!" Screams erupted from the crowd. Seeing people fall into the sea, they became even more nervous. Xiao Ichen held onto Yo-Yo's hand tightly and groped in a direction with fewer people. Yo-Yo was very calm, and so was Xiao Chen. They knew very well that the most important thing was to stay calm. If they panicked, they wouldn't be able to do anything. The two little lads held hands tightly and weaved through the crowd. It was only when they left the area of the banquet hall that there were fewer and fewer people. Quite a number of sailors walked toward the cockpit. As they got closer to it, Yun Shusha's voice was suddenly heard from a corner. Yo-Yo. Xiao Chen. Yo-Yo was the first to hear it. Xiao Chen heard it as well. Both of them stopped in their tracks and looked towards the source of the voice. They saw Yun Shusha running towards them. She hugged them anxiously and looked them up and down. She saw that Yo-Yo and Xiao Chen had different degrees of injuries on their bodies. Yo-Yo's face had some bruises. When she saw the bloodstains on Xiao Chen's abdomen, she held her breath. Xiao Chen, you're injured. Xiao Chen comforted her. Mommy, don't worry. The blood isn't mine. He lied to her on purpose to comfort her. He didn't want her to worry, especially at a time like this. Yo-Yo said strangely, Mommy, why are you here? Xiao Chen said that you were in the cockpit. Xiao Chen suddenly realized something and asked suspiciously, is the captain dead? Yun Shusha nodded guiltily. I stabbed him. I don't know if it's because I injured his arteries, but he lost a lot of blood and fainted. He's no longer showing any signs of life. I shouldn't have hit him so hard. Is he trying to kill you? Xiao Chen's eyes flashed dangerously. Yes, if that's the case, Mommy, you don't have to blame yourself. He deserved to die. After pausing for a moment, Xiao Chen continued, I suspect that the ship has hit a reef and there's a big hole in the bottom of the ship. Most likely, water has entered the ship and caused it to tilt. I'm worried that the boat will capsize soon. Capsize? She sucked in a breath of cold air. What should we do? Xiao Chen said, let's find a lifeboat and leave this place. Mommy, don't be afraid. There's still time. We can make it. Where is the lifeboat? Under normal circumstances, it should be on the left and right sides of the Xian. I haven't seen it on my way here. I'll go to the stern to take a look immediately. All right. Yun Shusha nodded. Yo-Yo suddenly grabbed Xiao Chen. The latter turned around with a puzzled expression and asked, what's wrong? Dietriss's VIP cabin is in the middle. Yes, then, will he place the lifeboat at the stern, which is far away from the middle? Yo-Yo narrowed his eyes suspiciously. Xiao Chen heard this and seemed to have woken up from a dream. The lifeboat should be near the VIP cabin. Xiao Chen grabbed Yun Shusha and Yo-Yo's hands and said, let's go back. The three of them walked through the chaotic crowd. When they arrived near the VIP cabin, they saw Dietriss walking toward the right side of the ship, surrounded by his subordinates. Chapter 33:53. After they left, a few of his subordinates rushed over and untied him. As if he knew that the cruise ship had hit the rocks and was about to go silent, Dietrich hysterically ordered his subordinates to release the lifeboats. Yo-Yo had hit his head with a vase, so even though he had regained consciousness, he looked groggy and not very clear-headed. Hearing footsteps on the deck, Dietrich turned his head and saw Xiao Chen and Yo-Yo. He was so frightened that he staggered and fell to the ground. When he saw Xiao Chen, he seemed to be especially frightened. He kept retreating and pointed at Xiao Chen with a trembling finger. He shouted at the top of his lungs, kill them, don't leave them alive, kill them. Yo-Yo was stunned. She knew that Dietrich had gone completely crazy. He probably knew that Xiao Chen's abilities were extraordinary, so he wanted to kill them at all costs. However, Xiao Chen was injured. His abdomen had been stabbed by Dietrich's hidden weapon. If he was unharmed, it would not be a problem for him to deal with these defeated soldiers. However, now that Xiao Chen was injured, it would be dangerous if they focused on Xiao Chen. Xiao Chen was not afraid at all. He stepped forward and protected Yo-Yo and Yun Shusha behind him. He said coldly, if you dare to take a step forward, I swear that I will kill you. Even if he had to risk his life, he swore to protect Mommy and Yo-Yo. Dietrich's subordinates were about to charge forward with their daggers drawn, but when they heard this, they hesitated. They did not have guns on them, but even if they did, they might not dare to charge forward recklessly. If they had guns, they would still have some confidence. However, if they were unarmed, they would not have any chance of winning if they fought barehanded. Some of these people had experienced Xiao Ichen's terrifying skills before. It was hard to imagine that such a small body of a child actually contained such powerful energy. Even though the one standing in front of them was only an 8-year-old child, his gaze was piercingly cold, and his entire body seemed to be bathed in blood. His small body seemed to emit an extremely powerful aura, overbearing and domineering. Such a terrifying and powerful aura was something that not even an adult warrior who had experienced hundreds of battles could possess. This kind of aura was definitely not because of his extraordinary skills, but because of his strong desire to protect. In his heart, there was someone he wanted to protect. Therefore, even if he seemed weak at times, he would emit a terrifying energy at any moment. "What are you waiting for?" Dietrich kicked him. "What are you waiting for? Charge. Are you afraid of a child?" I stabbed him in the abdomen. After a pause, Dieterys gritted his teeth and said, "Focus on where he's injured and attack his vitals." His subordinates looked at each other before hesitantly pouncing on Mu Ichen. Xiao Ichen pushed Yo-Yo away and said to him, "Protect mommy." Yo-Yo nodded and held Yun Shusha's hand as they dodged to the side. Yun Shusha was worried about Xiao Ichen. She was worried that he would be attacked by so many people and get injured. Yo-Yo suddenly pulled her back and said to her, "Mommy, don't charge forward. Otherwise, you'll cause trouble. Then, we can't just watch." Chapter 33:54. I have an idea. Yo-Yo paused for a moment before continuing, "But Mommy, you have to promise me that you'll stay here and not move." "What are you going to do?" "There's no time to explain. You'll know soon enough." Yo-Yo turned and left after he finished speaking. Yun Shusha stood guard for a long time, trembling in fear. A few of Dietriss's subordinates rushed forward and surrounded Xiao Ichen. According to Dietriss's instructions, the few of them aimed at Xiao Ichen's injured area and attacked. Yun Shusha watched on in fear. Xiao Ichen knew how despicable these people were, so he took extra precautions. Yun Shusha originally wanted to rush forward, but when she thought of Yo-Yo's words, she didn't dare to act recklessly. She was afraid that she wouldn't be of any help and would become a burden to Xiao Ichen and cause him more trouble. Knives and spears didn't hurt one's eyes, so she didn't dare to act recklessly. Yun Shusha hid in a corner. From the corner of her eye, she suddenly saw Dietrich walking to the back of the boat with his walking stick and activating something. It seemed like he wanted to raise and lower the lifeboat. When Xiao Ichen saw this, he was worried that Dietrich would take advantage of the chaos to escape on the lifeboat. He broke the wrist of one of his subordinates with a kick and threw a machete in front of Yun Shusha. "Mommy, don't let him escape." "Okay." Yun Shusha nodded heavily and rushed over to grab the machete tightly in her hand. She held the machete tightly and avoided the center of the fight. She ran behind Dietrich and viciously slashed the machete at him. Dietrich's reaction was still considered agile. When he heard the movement behind him, he quickly turned around and dodged her attack in time. However, because he dodged too pathetically, he fell to the ground and the half-lowered lifeboat was suspended. Yun Shusha gripped the hilt of her sword nervously. Before she could attack again, Dieterys kicked her knee. She heard a crack, which seemed to be the sound of a dislocated joint. She groaned in pain and fell to one knee, caught off guard. Seeing Demetrius lunging at her to dodge the knife in her hand, she subconsciously raised her hand and threw the knife into the sea. Rather than let him snatch it, he might as well throw it away. She was not good at using a knife. Therefore, if she kept it in her hand, she might accidentally hurt herself. However, what Dietrich did not know was that Yun Shusha was filming Extreme Youth, and there were a few fighting scenes that the crew had specially hired professional instructors to train her. Just as he was about to pounce on her like a wolf, she nimbly dodged and reached out to grab his arm. Following the inertia, she bent his arm backward. Only a crack sound could be heard. It was the clear sound of bones breaking. Dietrich's voice was already hoarse from screaming. Due to the excruciating pain of the dislocated bone, he was drenched in cold sweat, but he could not make a sound. His eyes were ferocious as he looked back. Yun Shusha's fist was aimed at his eyes. She was wearing a ring on her finger. This was a priceless jewel that was prepared for her to be auctioned off. The 1-carat diamond ring, which was extremely hard, pierced his eyes. Dietrich was in so much pain that his whole body convulsed. He broke free from her and covered his eyes as he rolled around on the ground. She struggled to stand up and nimbly tore off a large section of her skirt. Taking advantage of the fact that he could not retaliate, she tied his hands tightly behind his back. Chapter 33:55. When Yun Shusha stood up and turned her head, she saw that Xiao Chen was gradually losing his strength. The exhaustion on his face showed that he had overexerted himself. Ichen. In her anxiety, she was about to rush over when she suddenly heard rumbling footsteps from across the deck. It sounded as if a large group of people were running toward them. Everyone nervously stopped what they were doing and looked in the direction of the sound. They saw Yo-Yo running to the front with a large group of people behind him. He shouted at the top of his lungs, "Mommy, release the lifeboat. Quick!" When Xiao Chen heard this, he quickly rushed over to save the lifeboat. Yun Shusha finally understood what Yo-Yo was doing. He must have been worried that Xiao Chen would not be able to outlast these people. Hence, he ran to the banquet hall and told the bewildered guests that they could leave on the lifeboat. These people were eager to win, so they followed Yo-Yo. The rumbling of the crowd caused the entire deck to shake. The more chaotic the situation was, the more chaotic it was. In addition, no one stood out to give orders. Everyone was selfishly trying to survive and hoped that they would be safe. Hence, they did not care that their private actions would cause more and more chaos. Yun Shusha was also desperately looking for a mechanism. However, no matter how fast she was, she could not stop these crazy people. They quickly rushed over. In an instant, the sea of people was like a violent wave that destroyed Yo-Yo and Xiao Chen. Yun Shusha gritted her teeth and rushed into the crowd. When she saw Xiao Chen being pushed to the ground, she was worried that he would be injured. Without thinking, she pounced on him and used her body to shield him from the crowd. When Yo-Yo saw Yun Shusha protecting Xiao Chen, he pounced on her with heartache. He hugged Yun Shusha's back tightly and shielded her. Even though the crowd was surging, he did not let go. Creak, due to the excessive number of people surging towards the bow of the ship, most of the weight was placed on the bow of the ship. In an instant, the cruise ship tilted too much in a certain direction, causing the middle of the ship to show signs of cracking. Along with the tilt, many people were caught off guard and fell into the sea. Some of their heads fiercely hit the poles and fell into the sea, creating a pool of blood. Yun Shusha hugged Mu Ichen tightly while Yo-Yo hugged her. The three of them curled up in a corner and relied solely on Yun Shusha's strength. She held onto the railing tightly and barely stabilized her center of gravity. At this moment, the sound of propellers suddenly came from the sky. Da, the dark night sky was suddenly illuminated by the light from the helicopter. In an instant, it was as bright as day. Everyone looked up at the sky. The cabin door of the helicopter opened, and a ladder was thrown down from the cabin door. Several fully armed mercenaries jumped along the ladder and landed steadily on the deck, raising their submachine guns. Sparks flashed at the muzzle of the gun. In the blink of an eye, they killed their way out. Yun Shusha did not know where these mercenaries came from. Seeing that they killed people without hesitation, she thought that they were Dietrich's subordinates. She immediately hugged Xiao Chen tightly in her arms, fear in her eyes. When Yo-Yo saw the logo on their uniforms, a calm smile suddenly appeared on his face. He suddenly stood up and was about to walk towards them. Yun Shusha pulled him back nervously. Yo-Yo, what are you doing? Mommy, don't be afraid. Yo-Yo smiled and comforted her gently. It's okay. They are all my subordinates. What? Chapter 33:56. Yun Shusha was stunned. She looked at the row of valiant soldiers behind Yo-Yo and her mind went blank. Subordinates? Yo-Yo turned around to face them. The smile on his face faded as he said coldly, "Why are you only here now?" The three soldiers immediately knelt on one knee. Their tall and strong bodies were much taller than Yo-Yo. However, such strong mercenaries were actually kneeling in front of a child. The leader said in a low voice, "Sorry, sir. We were a step too late." Their appearance greatly controlled the order of the scene. When the crowd saw them, they did not dare to act recklessly. They quickly retreated, afraid that they would infuriate them and become cold corpses like the people they had killed. The helicopter slowly descended. The crowd moved aside, and the huge helicopter landed steadily on the deck. The propellers slowly stopped. Mu Yaja suddenly appeared at the cabin door. He jumped down and his gaze fell on her. When he saw her hand, he frowned and quickly walked over. When Yun Shusha saw him, she suppressed all her grievances and forced a smile. He walked in front of her and half knelt on the ground. He held her shoulders tightly and looked at her from head to toe. She was worried that he would mistakenly think that she was seriously injured, so she quickly clarified, "This is not my blood." Mu Yaja clearly did not believe her. Only after he did a cursory check and confirmed that the blood was not hers did he relax slightly. In Yun Shusha's arms, Xiao Chen's body was slightly curled up. Due to his vigorous movements, the wound on his abdomen opened up again and blood stained her body. Xiao Chen was obviously seriously injured. Hence, his eyelids were heavy. When he vaguely heard Mu Yaja's voice, he was relieved. However, he soon fainted. Yo-Yo quickly said, "Daddy, we can't stay here for long. The cruise ship has hit a reef and the hull is damaged. It will sink soon." Mu Yaja frowned. Yo-Yo continued, "Xiao Chen's abdomen is injured. Daddy, he has lost a lot of blood and needs immediate surgery." Understood. Mu Yaja took Xiao Chen from Yun Shusha's arms. He stood up and walked towards the cabin door. When he turned around, he saw that Yo-Yo did not follow him. Mu Yaja turned around and said in confusion, "Yo-Yo, get on the helicopter as soon as possible." "Daddy, how many mercenaries did you bring?" "3. This helicopter can carry 5 people. Pilot, you, Xiao Chen, and Mommy. Mommy, I will send a mercenary to protect you." "Let the mercenary stay." Mu Yaja said, "You get on the helicopter." "No." Yo-Yo glanced at Dietrich, who was unconscious on the deck. His gaze turned cold. "I don't care about the others, but I have to take this old man with me. I still have a score to settle with him." He was worried. Dietrich was cunning and he had to keep an eye on him. The crew was evacuated separately to ensure their safety. Mu Yaja naturally did not agree. How could he leave him alone? No. Chapter 3357. Mu Yaja finally agreed. Yo-Yo smiled, walked forward, and stuffed a purple crystal into Xiao Chen's clenched fist. In the rush of the crowd, many of the purple crystals had been squeezed out and rolled around. However, he held them tightly. There were still 2 left. These were gifts from Xiao Chen. Now, he gave them to him as a possession talisman. Yo-Yo was really worried about Xiao Chen. Therefore, he hoped that Mu Yaja would take Xiao Chen away as soon as possible for treatment. Yun Shusha said, "Yo-Yo, I'll stay with you. Mommy, be good and listen to me. I'll be fine. You'll only make things worse if you stay. After all, it's more troublesome to protect 2 people than 1. As he spoke, he took a few steps back and waved his hand. Mu Yaja hugged Yun Shusha's shoulders and brought her onto the helicopter. When the people on the deck saw this, they mustered their courage and walked toward the helicopter with hope of survival. A few mercenaries stepped forward and stood in front of Yu to protect him. They raised their submachine guns and fired at the deck. Everyone retreated a few steps in fright and could only watch helplessly as the helicopter slowly ascended and left. Yo-Yo sighed and turned around to look for something on the floor. When the mercenaries behind him saw this, they walked forward and asked curiously, "Sir, what are you looking for?" "I'll look for it for you." "No need. You won't find it. I don't even know what I'm looking for. I'll look for it myself." As Yo-Yo spoke, he lay on the floor and carefully looked for it. What he said just now was just an excuse. He stayed because he wanted to find the remaining purple crystals as soon as possible. He turned around and searched the deck. Finally, he found a few purple crystals scattered on the floor. He held them tightly in his palm as if they were his most precious treasure. "Great! I've finally found them." When he got home, he would string them together into a bracelet. He had to make it stronger and protect it carefully. He could not lose it so easily again. In the distance, another helicopter flew over and landed on the deck. The people on the deck were hopeful, but they did not dare to go forward. They were afraid of the two mercenaries beside Yo-Yo. They were well built and looked well trained. Moreover, they had guns in their hands. Bullets did not have eyes. Otherwise, they would have gone forward and boarded the rescue helicopter. Another mercenary walked down from the helicopter. Yo-Yo ordered him to bring Diris onto the helicopter. He planned to bring him back to Hurricane's headquarters to settle the score, and yo-yo-yo-yo. Yo-yo-yo-yo-yo. Yo-yo-yo-yo. And yo-yo-yo. Only a handful of the people here. Yo-yo-yo. 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 Yo-yo-yo-yo. Yo-oh-yo-yo. She's only 3 years old. Hearing this, Yu could not help but feel a little sympathetic for her. The girl in his arms did not know what was going on. She looked at him innocently with her big, watery eyes and sucked on her fingers. Yo-Yo looked at her and his heart softened. In reality, he did not plan to save anyone on the ship. Most of the people who entered and exited this cruise ship were rich and ruthless nobles. They took human lives for fun just because they had a lot of money. Chapter 3358. Some of them had lost their conscience, and such people were not worth saving. However, Yo-Yo thought of his mother when he saw the innocent child. If it was his mother, she would sacrifice herself to protect him. His heart softened when he thought of this. The woman continued to plead, "Please, the child is innocent." Yo-Yo was silent for a long time as if he was thinking. Finally, he said calmly, "Bring the girl onto the plane." The woman's eyes lit up and she immediately handed the little girl over to them, thanking them profusely. Yo-Yo boarded the plane and the mercenaries escorted Dietris into the cabin. Only then did they realize that Dietris had left a suitcase beside him. This old man did not forget to bring money with him even when he was running for his life. The plane started slowly and the propellers stirred up waves as it slowly rose into the air. When they were in the air and looking down at the cruise ship, Yo-Yo realized that the huge cruise ship had broken apart from the middle. Just as Xiao Chen had said, the cruise ship had hit a reef. It was probably a very hard reef that had split open the ship's belly. The bottom of the ship must have been split open. Endless seawater poured into the crack and into the cabin. The bottom 2 floors had probably been submerged by the seawater. The hull of the ship was very long and its buoyancy was affected, causing it to sink continuously. The middle of the ship had also started to break apart due to the imbalance of gravity. Yo-Yo sat on the cruise ship with lingering fear. He did not dare to imagine that if his uncle's men had not arrived in time, the cruise ship would have sunk to the bottom of the sea. However, this was not the scariest thing. The scariest thing was the desperate crowd on the ship. In the face of death, the most selfish instincts of human nature were revealed. Perhaps they would not be able to wait until the cruise ship sank and would be trampled to death by the crazy crowd. Yo-Yo heaved a sigh of relief. However, before he could completely relax, he heard a man's sinister laughter behind him. Ha ha ha. Yo-Yo was shocked. He turned around and looked at Dietris. He did not know when he had woken up. This cunning man. If he was not sure that he was tied up tightly, he would have been nervous. However, he was clearly the one in the most passive position right now, so how could he still laugh? Yo-Yo asked coldly, "What are you laughing at?" Dietrich smiled, revealing a mouthful of sinister teeth. "I'm laughing at your naivety." "What? Do you really think you're safe now?" "Naive? Who was the naive one?" Yo-Yo snorted coldly without any expression on her face. She did not want to talk to him anymore. But Dietris continued to ask, "Why didn't you leave me on the cruise ship? I don't think you're so kind-hearted as to really want to save me. Don't tell me you don't want me to die." Yo-Yo said, "I'm keeping you alive because we still have a score to settle between us." "Settle the score?" "Oh," Dietris replied curiously. "What do you want to settle with me?" "Mommy's debt, Xiao Chen's debt, and the debt between you and me. All of this should be accounted for. It just so happens that I also have a score that I want to settle with you. However, I'm afraid you won't have the chance to do so." "What do you mean?" Before Yo-Yo could finish speaking, he saw Dietris's mouth move. He widened his eyes in confusion and saw that Dietris was grinning slightly. Between his lips, there was something black. Chapter 3359. It looked like a piece of plastic, but it wasn't as simple as plastic. He seemed to have been holding it in his mouth for a long time, embedded between his teeth. Yo-Yo took a closer look and saw that it was a mini mechanism. He instinctively raised his hand to protect his eyes. However, this thing didn't seem to be the hidden weapon he had imagined. Dytris bit the thing and exerted some force. Then, he heard a long beep sound. A beep, beep, beep electronic sound came from his body. "What's that sound?" Yo-Yo ordered. "Go and take a look. Something on his body is making a sound." "Yes." The mercenary walked forward. Dytris stared at him like a tiger watching its prey, but his lips were curled into a smug and cold-blooded smile, as if he was determined to get his hands on her. "Behave yourself." The man punched him, and the thing in his mouth fell to the ground due to the huge inertia. He picked it up and looked at it. His eyes were shocked. He kicked Dietrich to the ground and lifted his clothes. Sure enough, he saw a small mini box on his waist. He opened the box and saw that it was a mini time bomb. The bomb had already started its countdown. 60 seconds were running out. Yo-Yo also saw the bomb on his body. He stood up and walked to Dytris's side, his eyes wide open in shock. "You. Ha ha ha." Dytris laughed crazily. He knew that he was going to die. Even if Yo-Yo spared his life, he would make him wish he was dead. He had already expected this. Hence, the bomb on his body was his last resort. Dytris's lips split open and he laughed arrogantly. "Ha ha ha. Since I'm going to die sooner or later, rather than die in your hands, why don't you accompany me to hell? How about it?" Yo-Yo was so angry that he gritted his teeth. The mercenary squatted down to study the bomb, but Dytris was calm. He said coldly, "I advise you not to move. Once this bomb is activated, it's only a matter of time before it explode. Don't waste your time. Die with me, in your dreams." Yo-Yo immediately said, "Open the hatch and throw him into the sea." The mercenary nodded, squatted down, and nimbly removed the chains on his body. When they boarded the plane, in order to stabilize him, Yo-Yo had ordered people to tie him to the rack. Now, the chains were heavy, and it would take some effort to untie him. Dyteris laughed even more proudly. "You're too smart for your own good. When you've undone it, throw me into the sea. You won't be able to escape death." "Shut up. Don't underestimate this bomb. It's so small, but I don't mind letting you see its power." Yo-Yo gritted his teeth and grabbed his collar, glaring at him. "Don't you dare." 30 seconds left. The bomb was about to explode. It's too late. He made a prompt decision. He knew that if they wasted time on unlocking the chains, they would really be buried with Dietrich. The mercenary opened the hatch and looked at the sea. He turned around and exchanged glances with Yo-Yo. He nimbly put an oxygen mask on Yo-Yo's face and hugged him in his arms. Yo-Yo immediately understood what he was going to do. "Are you crazy?" "Sir, I'm very conscious." Chapter 3360. You have to understand that if you jump from such a high plane, it's no different from falling from a 10-story building. Trust me. The mercenary carried him to the cabin door and hugged the child tightly. The other two mercenaries also approached. The pilot initiated the emergency landing procedure and walked to the cabin door as well. Mu-Yaja walked to the back of the ship and looked into the distance. In mid-air, the helicopter was slowly approaching. It could be seen with the naked eye and would land in a few minutes. Yun Shusha and Xiao Chen had already been sent to the ship's medical team. Mu-Yaja was only concerned about Yo-Yo, so he walked to the helipad to wait for him. Gong Jie was looking into the distance with a pair of binoculars when he suddenly noticed something. His eyes widened and he was extremely shocked. "What's going on?" Mu-Yaja, who had originally calmed down, immediately became nervous. He snatched the binoculars from Gong Jie's hands and saw the cabin door open. A few mercenaries stood at the cabin door in an orderly manner. The biting cold wind blew, and one of them was holding a child tightly. He recognized at a glance that the child in the man's arms was Yo-Yo. However, the strange thing was that they were planning to jump off the plane. Mu-Yaja almost didn't have time to think. The next second, he saw 4 people jump out of the cabin door one after another. Their bodies were like feathers, lightly floating toward the sea. "What's going on?" Gong Jie also saw this scene. He rushed to the railing nervously and held the handrail nervously. However, there was a loud boom. Then, the helicopter exploded in an instant. It was as if a curtain of fire had exploded in the night sky. Even though they were far away, they seemed to be able to feel the airwaves caused by the explosion. It was almost spreading toward them. The deck also shook, and the explosion caused strong waves on the sea. The ship was slightly jolted. Gong Jie was frightened, and his breathing suddenly stopped. Mu Yaja clenched his fists, but his gaze was fixed on the figure that kept falling toward the sea. His heart suddenly stopped beating. It seemed that the explosion had occurred in the cabin. The entire fuselage shook, and the propeller was broken and scattered. At that moment, it was as if the end of the world had arrived. The entire world was grey and the turbulence was as if the earth was shaking and the mountains were shaking. The tragic fire and a cloud of fire instantly disintegrated the helicopter into ruins, and the black wreckage kept falling toward the sea. Mu Yaja's eyes suddenly turned red. Yo-yo. Gong Jie was so shocked that his throat seemed to be blocked, and he could not make a sound. No, no. Yu was hugged tightly to the man's chest. His large palm protected the back of the boy's head as he buried his face in his chest. His large body formed a bundle that wrapped the boy in his embrace. He only felt that the two of them were in a straight parabola, like a sharp needle, piercing through the air and piercing into the calm sea. The burning wreckage kept falling, and among them, there was a broken propeller that smashed onto the man's back. There was a loud sound, and he seemed to have heard the sound of his back breaking. He was so nervous that he closed his eyes and fell into endless despair. Crash. Chapter 3361. Even though Yo-Yo was being held tightly in someone's arms and the impact was reduced significantly, falling from a height of more than 20 meters and hitting the surface of the sea was undoubtedly the same impact as falling from a tall building. He held onto his breathing mask tightly and greedily sucked in the meager amount of oxygen. The mercenary who was holding onto him suffered a huge blow to the head. He suffered from intracranial hemorrhage and died on the spot. Even though he was already dead, he was still holding onto him tightly. Unfortunately, it was this kind of protection. Yo-Yo was locked tightly in his arms. As his body fell, he kept falling into the abyss. He was getting further and further away from the surface of the sea. He kept reaching out, but it was all in vain. Mommy. Yo-Yo struggled to open his mouth and a string of vague syllables escaped. Daddy. Brother. He kept struggling. His survival instinct made him want to live. More importantly, it was because he was worried about the person in his heart. Yao. The helicopter disintegrated in the air. The burning wreckage fell into the sea and floated on the surface of the sea. The sky was filled with smoke. At 5 o'clock in the morning, the sky was turning bright. The horizon stretched as far as the eye could see. Two huge armed ships surrounded the area where Yo-Yo fell. The aircraft carrier was parked in the center. It lowered its speedboats and started to salvage the area. More than 10 speedboats rushed on the sea, cleaning up the floating oil on the surface of the sea at the fastest speed. A whole hour had passed. So many people had been sent out. So far, they had only salvaged the wreckage of the helicopter and an undamaged suitcase. The $500 million in the suitcase was still intact. Xiao Chen was still unconscious. Yun Shusha was unconscious for a short while. When she woke up, her heart stopped beating when she heard the bad news. Yo-Yo had fallen into the sea. There was no news of him until now. No one knew if he was dead or alive. Yun Shusha could not take such a huge blow. She could not believe it. However, when she rushed out of the cabin and saw the scene in front of her with her own eyes, she finally believed that Yo-Yo had really fallen into the sea and disappeared. The reason for the fall was the explosion of the helicopter. However, the exact cause of the explosion was still unknown. Falling from a height of more than 20 meters into the sea, his life or death was unknown. Mu Yaja was still worried. He put on a diving suit and personally went to the sea to search for Yo-Yo. Gong Jie calmly commanded while comforting the terrified Yun Shusha. Yun Shusha guarded the cabin and did not go anywhere. She was full of hope that the people in charge of the salvage would bring back good news. However, other than some wreckage, some parts, and a few floating corpses, there was no breakthrough. The deepest part of the sea was thousands of meters deep. So far, the people that were sent out were mainly searching within 300 meters of the sea surface. 300 meters was the maximum range that could be searched. The deeper parts of the sea were places that humans could not go. It was too dangerous and required the use of instruments. The ship was equipped with such instruments and had been thrown into the sea. However, the images that were sent back did not show any clues. They were already narrowing down the scope of the salvage operation. It would take a lot of effort just to salvage the wreckage. Not to mention an 8-year-old child. It was like looking for a needle in a haystack. Sir. A diver came back to report that they had found a corpse. Yoon Shusha stood up agitatedly, and her brother immediately asked her what kind of corpse it was. Chapter 3362. The diver said, the body was chained up, and his body was badly mutilated. However, after identification, we can confirm that he's from Diatrisborn. After a brief examination, we found that he had explosives tied to his body, so we can confirm the cause of the accident. Explosives? Yes. A suicide bomber. Gong Jie gritted his teeth in hatred. This sly old fox, even in death, he wanted to take someone down with him. Before the oxygen in the oxygen tank ran out, Mu Yaja returned to the shore. He took off his diving goggles, looked back at the sea, and bit his lip hard. He had been searching for 2 hours without stopping. In the cold sea, he had almost exhausted all his energy. He ate some compressed biscuits to replenish his energy, changed his oxygen tank, and prepared to go back into the water. Gong Jie stopped him. Are you crazy? Unlike on land, the energy consumption in the sea is several times higher. Don't push yourself too hard. Mu Yaja turned around and looked at him. We don't know whether Yo-Yo is dead or alive. Do you want me to stay on the shore and do nothing? I can't do that. At least, you should rest for a while. Gong Jie said again, if you consume too much energy, it'll be dangerous. I know what to do. Gong Jie wanted to say something, but Mu Yaja turned around and left quickly. Now, every minute and second was incomparably precious to him. The salvage operation lasted for 5 hours, but there was no news. The golden rescue period was slowly approaching, and the hope of survival was getting slimmer and slimmer. They found a few more bodies, but other than the bodies of the 3 mercenaries, there was still no news of the pilot and Yo-Yo. For a moment, they felt that something was amiss. In such a short period of time, it was impossible for a person to fall too deep, let alone be washed too far away by the waves. Gong Jie had sealed off the sea area as soon as possible. Basically, Yo-Yo would only be in this area, so how could they not catch him? In the regenerated sea area, a person would not sink because the sea was buoyant. 300 meters was already very deep, and a person could not sink to a few thousand meters in such a short period of time. That would be inconceivable. Where could they have gone? Gong Jie was both anxious and worried. This sudden turn of events had caught him off guard. Yoon Shusha was already on the verge of collapse. She stood guard on the boat. Even though she was exhausted, she didn't dare to close her eyes. He was worried that once he opened his eyes, the whole world would be turned upside down. The more time passed and the more there was no news, the more she blamed herself. If it wasn't for her, Yo-Yo wouldn't be in such a dangerous situation. She was such a failure. What kind of danger did he encounter that he needed his 2 sons to save him? She also found out about Yo-Yo's other identity. She did not expect Yo-Yo to be related to the Hurricane Group. She also did not know that Yo-Yo was one of the core members of the Hurricane Group. She originally thought that Yo-Yo had a toy company that was currently being managed by Lee Hanlin. She did not expect that he had an even deeper identity. She did not know much and did not have the heart to care, but she knew that the culprit who kidnapped her this time, Diatris, was after Yo-Yo. Diatris and the Hurricane Group had a deep grudge. Hence, even if he died, he swore to drag Yo-Yo down to hell with him. If she had known, but there was no such thing. She had been kept in the dark from the beginning. Chapter 3363. Yoon Shusha was almost suffocating from the pain. If anything happened to Yo-Yo, she would never forgive herself. Too much time had passed, and all the people who went into the sea were exhausted. Gong Shaojie naturally could not withdraw the team. If they could not salvage it in 5 hours, then they would spend 10 or even 20 hours. He did not believe that there would be no news at all. However, for now, no news was the best news. Hurricane headquarters. The medical center was on standby. The phone suddenly rang. Gong Xiaoying received the call, and his expression became serious. He led the team to the helipad. In the distance, a helicopter flew over slowly, circled once, and slowly landed on the helipad. The wind was a little strong. Gong Xiaoying narrowed his eyes slightly. Looking at the helicopter that landed steadily on the helipad, his gaze became scorching hot. The cabin door opened, and a pilot in a sorry state jumped out. He was holding a child wrapped in a blanket in his arms, and hurried to Gong Xiaoying. Gong Xiaoying asked in a low voice, "Is he okay?" The pilot took a deep breath, shook his head, and answered in a serious tone, "Boss, fortunately, he's fine. He's just hit the back of his head, and he's unconscious." Gong Xiaoying raised his hand and untied the blanket, revealing the child's delicate but pale face. The child's eyes were tightly shut. His long eyelashes were wet from the seawater, and his slightly greenish eyelids were probably frozen by the seawater. His skin was extremely cold, and there was no warmth. The seawater was cold, and after being soaked in it for a long time, his originally fair face was even paler than before. Because he was wearing an oxygen mask, there were dark red marks from his nose to his mouth. The oxygen mask had been removed. The child was still unconscious. Gong Xiaoying's expression changed slightly. He scrutinized the child's face carefully, and he was a little moved. Similar. Very similar. Those eyebrows, those eyes, that perky nose, they were somewhat similar to Mu Qingqing's. They were similar in appearance and spirit. This child was very much like his grandmother. Especially those eyes, they reminded him of her at first glance. However, due to his injuries, he looked extremely weak. Gong Xiaoying was well aware of the child's identity. Other than being his grandson, he was also one of the core people in charge of Project Heaven's Eye. For the past few years, he had been kept in the dark and didn't know anything. However, when Yo-Yo returned to the island with Gong Jie, someone leaked the news. When he returned to the headquarters, he heard some rumors. Following the clues, he quickly found out the child's identity. It turned out that his daughter had given birth to such a genius grandson. He had never believed that the person who came up with the Sky Eye plan was really an 8-year-old child. What was even more unbelievable was that this child was his grandson. At such a young age, he had already surpassed his master. He was proud of this, but he also felt that it was a pity that he had only just found out that Yo-Yo was his grandson. He couldn't help but sigh. "How is he?" Gong Xiaoying's heart ached. He immediately ordered, "Hurry up and send him to the medical center." At the medical center, the operating theater, Alice received the notice and rushed over. However, she was slightly stunned when she saw the child lying on the operating table. This child was not Gong Jie's. Back then, Gong Jie had threatened and bribed her to keep this secret from Gong Xiaoying. Chapter 3364. Gong Xiaoying was standing in front of the operating table. When he saw her, he called her over. "Alice." "Yes. This is my grandson. I'll hand him over to you. You must cure him." Alice was stunned for a long time until Gong Xiaoying's cold gaze landed on her. She hurriedly nodded and said, "Understood." She did not dare to disobey Gong Xiaoying's orders. Before she came, her subordinates had already done a series of precise examinations on the child. Other than some external injuries, a moderate concussion, and slight intracranial damage, the child's various functions could be said to be very poor. How poor? If these conditions were not improved, he would not live past 20 years. This was not an exaggeration. The medical elites gathered at the Hurricane Group's headquarters were definitely the best in the world. Basically, this was a conservative estimate. 20 years was still a relatively optimistic situation. The various functions of his organs were not optimistic, especially his organs. Yo-Yo's heart was naturally fragile and weak. Moreover, his physique was not satisfactory. Compared to Xiao Chen's physique, Yo-Yo's physique had always been poor since he was born. After years of careful treatment, although there were some improvements year by year, it could be said to be minimal. Alice took the report and flipped through a few pages. Her expression was grave. There's a big problem with his heart. What problem? Congenital heart failure. When Gong Xiaoying heard this, his heart suddenly sank. According to Gong Jie, Alice said carefully, this child was born prematurely. He was not even a month old. His older brother's physique is very strong. It's probably because he was deprived of nutrients in his mother's womb that he developed poorly. Gong Xiaoying's eyes revealed a hint of coldness. You already knew about this child's existence. Alice's heart skipped a beat and she did not speak for a moment. Gong Xiaoying's tone became more dangerous. You hid it from me together with him? Alice lowered her head guiltily. Her voice trembled slightly. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hide it from you. Forget it. Gong Xiaoying waved his hand expressionlessly and said coldly, I know. This was all his idea. Alice remained silent. You said that he has a heart problem. Then, is there a corresponding treatment plan? Alice looked up and hesitated for a long time before she slowly said, It's not that I don't have one. It's just that I need some time. Gong Xiaoying frowned. How long is a little time? 5 years. Alice continued, because I don't know what level it is, I can't say for the time being. However, it's not like there are no conditions that can be improved. Do you need a heart transplant? No need. Alice said bluntly, even if it's a heart transplant, no matter how good the medical skills are, after the transplant surgery, they can't live more than 10 years. This is already the highest record in the medical field. Oh. Gong Xiaoying turned around and looked at her. He said slowly, I'll leave this child to you. You must do your best for me. Yes.